Let's do it.
We're recording?
Yep.
We're live?
And streaming.
Do we have link?
Nope. So we still have to set up some things. And this should be yet again one of the best live streams ever. As it is each time. Alright, here we go. Set up the YouTube chat. I got it working. Got her working. YouTube. Okay.
Something went wrong.
Yeah, actually I didn't fully set it up yet, did I? Okay, good. I think that's fine. Yeah. So YouTube chat is working. Let's grab the link there and share it. Copy. Share it with our Portal Mountain friends.
It has begun.
Yeah. I don't know why it didn't give a preview, although that's probably better that way. Alright, that's all we gotta do, I think. That is it. You're being obscured. Obscured by the chat. There you go. Stop slouching.
I'm not slouching. I'm actually not slouching. I'm just leaning back.
Alright. So today is a very special day. I'm still going to set up my monitor.
Yeah.
As they always are.
Yeah, I think the...
So we're trying to bring it down to the ground. From outer space.
Yeah, we've been quite hysteric for the past 14 dev meetings, describing everything from mental processes to economies to the universe, polyverse, and beyond. Today, I think, since we haven't done so, and I think it's about time where new people kind of got introduced to more of the basic stuff that that are closer to our humble beginnings. Yeah, we're going to just try to take all of that, ground it. Well, first of all, we're going to ground it and then take what we've done and sort of reintroduce it back once we've established something very specific to our goals right now.
Yeah, so we're going to try and bring together kind of all of where we've gone, some of the, I guess, most key points, and kind of inject that back into the basics that we started with the areas of concern.
Yeah.
Hygiene, fitness, nutrition, rest, focus, right?
No, it's hygiene, nutrition. Yeah.
Did I even say it in the right order?
You did, and for some reason my head said no.
That would be a complete fluke.
No,
it's because I did it so casually that you thought, you couldn't have got it right.
Yeah, I guess so. I need to strain sometimes.
It's almost like I've been studying.
Anyway, yeah, so that's correct. Collectively, we call them focus, which is actually the fifth area of concern. Not different, but unified. And then we have two more on top of that we generally don't discuss, but they are sort of tagged on top of the focus so that it's maintained. One of them is restoration, because focus can always be broken, and the second one is prevention, which is taking preventative measures from it being broken to begin with. So there's that's the full picture of the Immunity Guild.
Oh, it's set on private, that's why. Whoopsie daisies. Okay, live stream is public. That should fix anybody trying to join. But carry on. Sorry. So extra areas of concern on top, and we have
Yeah.
actually more. It expands out, right?
Yeah, so this concludes the what's called the Immunity Guild, and it's the most fundamental guild after sitting on education. And education is generally more fundamental simply because you can't do anything without knowing how to do it. So education bootstraps the Immunity Guild by talking about it, and the Immunity Guild is the doing of that conversation. And technically speaking, the function of education can stop there. However, it does expand further into further concerns that built on top of immunity. That's not the conversation we're having today, though. We're going to stick to the original, not the original, but the most fundamental areas of concern that act as the basis of all other areas of concern.
Yeah, so hopefully it should be kind of a more kind of basic
A gentle introduction.
area of exploration that we can kind of go through and apply these kind of more advanced topics, I guess, back into them. I'm still trying to get my monitor working here. Why aren't you?
Oh, I hate my nose.
Itching?
Very much so.
Come on, YouTube.
So are we ready?
I think so, except my monitor is being poop. So it is working, okay. And my audio that's because of that, which doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay, it's just my phone is, so let me copy that. Copy link.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's fine, it's just for our purposes. So, one thing we brought up, I guess, was the fundamental guilds. That was a couple episodes back or whatever.
Yep.
So we want to get into that. We want to get into our basic meditation, and maybe we could just call it the basic meditation.
Yeah, so we've already basically are covering that because the areas of concern are actually part of the Mediation Guild, which is
Yeah.
so it's already part of that. So that conversation can be said to be started. What I don't think we'll do at first is connect that dot just yet, aside from just stating it. We'll connect that dot a little later, towards the end, because then we will have the actual material with which we can construct the cards with. Right, so that's kind of the point, is to get to a point where the cards have content. So, do you want to refresh me?
Grab your beer, sure. While I'm here, please.
Thanks.
All right.
So yeah, so before we connect all these dots, we're going to remove all the gunk that we've been building up so far, get to the core, which are the areas of concern, and then from there rebuild back up to the kind of complexity that we've been dealing with already, but more from the perspective of, okay, well, it's great to know all of this stuff, but
What do you do with it?
yeah, what exactly are you supposed to do with it? It's great. It's like, how do we move from simple navel gazing into an actual world in which this is supposedly all happening, and
Right.
what is the meaning of this kind of information in that context.
Mhm.
So we're going to try to
And how does this modify your behaviors?
exactly, like
Potentially.
what does it mean to think about all of this stuff in a way that is actually not
Simply neurotic?
simply simply like a mental masturbation, as I like to call it.
Yep. One thing I wanted to bring up was something I think will be important here, and to kind of give a big picture context of what's going on here, what we're modeling, what we're doing with the model, and that's I guess the fact of what our neural network is doing, what our brain is doing to live and learn inside a world or an environment.
Right.
And what that is building and developing a map through learning, which is isomorphic to what is outside in the world, outside, quote unquote.
Yeah.
The things and how they work and the protocols.
I'd like to make a point that when we're dealing with the human species, there is a unique element there that isn't. We can't say it's not found elsewhere, but the issue with the human is that they have I'd like to include myself in this category. Is that we don't necessarily just do the things that we live to do. We also interpret them in a patterned way. So whereas most animals will have a more mechanical approach to their survival, where their biology dictates their activity for the most part, we are a slightly more generic species in which it's not necessarily our biology that dictates our activity so much as it is our mythology. We've externalized that aspect into a mental projection, and then recuperated the activity back through ritual. And so for the longest time, the human activity in its ritual were that isomorphic with the world, by having the interpretation of the world come back to us as a relevant mythology about those activities.
Right.
And so
The ritual should be a living ritual. It's kind of one of the keys there to sentience as well. Which
right.
Is another
But
important
the
topic.
fact that we've externalized it to the ritual is the driving force behind the next phase of our change, which allowed us to externalize that element of our ritual into the environment in the form of writing and the form of calculation and all of that stuff. And that started to speak back to us as well, because we're quite sophisticated at writing. And so it's the same process of externalization, but the full effect of this is that the more we've externalized, the less relevant it can become, and over time, with entropy involved, it does. So that's sort of the stage that we're
It does what?
become less relevant.
Oh, yeah.
The ritual becomes less relevant to the living experience, and it becomes more about some mechanical abstraction out
Right.
there that just happens to still keep us alive for
Yeah.
we don't know how
So
long.
this is a description of the general problem of civilization, I guess.
Yeah. So that's the playing field of externalizing. That's the playing field of the human, in the context and the difference of the human to the animal. In that the biological activity got offloaded into mental activity at first, and then that mental activity got offloaded further into the environment. And so these secondary removals from context are giving us a whole of a lot of problems.
Right.
Coming back to that same context, because we still happen to live in the same body that we've always lived in. So,
Right, and things get externalized, such as specialization in certain roles, which we don't have to worry about security and protection anymore because there's police and military.
Well, simple example right now, I'm not just drinking beer, I'm drinking a Moosehead, right? So like, the fact that I'm drinking a brand rather than a liquid of some sort is already like telling about the kind of removal that we're speaking about. There's like layers and layers and layers.
A little more tough to tease out.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest implications is that we become irresponsible for vast swaths of our culture and our functioning in a social context.
And this is especially true if you're navigating the world through brands. Because the brand is entirely removed from the actual process that you're talking about. You don't know about that process. All you know is the final tiny little bit that you get out of it as output.
Yeah, so anyways, I think taking back, I guess, the sort of power or whatever to navigate, one of the core things to do that is having this understanding that we're having a map inside of us that's developing, which is reflecting isomorphically to an outside world, and there's always a navigation or a balance back and forth. One informs the other, so your current experience informs your abstract understandings, and your abstract understandings inform your current experience, and there's a dynamic going on between these two.
So the question then becomes now, given that we have this map, what should it start mapping? Well, in an effort to place itself in the proper context, the first thing that it must map is itself. Otherwise, if it doesn't, it's just going to hop from subject to subject to subject to subject, not necessarily in any not necessarily giving it any kind of theme or meaning to tie it all together.
In other words, a grounding. It needs to be grounded somehow.
Right. So the effort we're putting through with the areas of concern is first and foremost is that grounding, which simply states that you are an organism in an environment, right? Like those are things that we assume to be given to us as far as what is out there to work with. So these are the basic tools: the organism, the environment, the activity of that organism in that environment, which amounts to itself maintaining itself in that environment. And on top of that, it isn't alone. So there's other elements that do exactly that kind of behavior in the environment. So not only is the environment an inert element within which an organism is moving, it is also a living environment in a social context. So that completes the full picture of the environment as a closed loop, and in the first place as the inert, and in the second place as the living social structure. So both contexts of the environment are relevant. So that is the main framework from which the mapping needs to start. So. And this is when we begin to dissect. Okay, so this is what we have, and the main part of the main relevant aspect of the structure is the maintenance, because that's where the activity is happening. So what does that maintenance of this organism in its environment, social environment, look like? And this is where we get into our areas of concern, because those need to be mapped to what we just described, the structure. So we have like this fourfold thing of like environment, organism, the neural OS that sits on top and does the maintenance of the organism from within it, by reflecting the environment and also reflecting the social structure of that environment as well.
Right.
So
And just a note, this reflects the holonic organization structure. Whenever you see, when you're seeing four stacked together.
So now that we have the structure, now we need to reflect it within within the neural OS. How do we reflect that? How do we map that by the neural OS? Well, we need to map it in terms of activity. So the first thing about maintenance, and that activity looks like maintenance. I'm getting a little.
Do we need charts? Should we pull up something?
I'm getting a little mixed up in my explanation. So, the structure itself is the holonic hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Holarchy,
basically. So that's the environment, organism, neural OS, social OS. Those are the things that are there, the tools that we have. How do we use them? Okay.
Right.
So what?
So let's start off with a basic self-help perspective. Like, forget all the holonic structure and all that.
Mm-hmm.
We have an organism which needs to survive
Pause.
and maintain itself in an environment.
Can you pause?
Right. Yeah. One second. All right. Okay, good. Because should I continue or?
No, so I just needed to gather my thoughts for a second.
Yeah, we're trying to keep it simple right at this point.
I'm trying to keep it simple, but I want to give a basic rundown of what we're dealing with as far as the given.
Yeah.
So that way we can start building up our framework.
Cool.
Am I good to go?
Yeah, we're good.
Alrighty. So the holarchy. We have the organism, we have the environment, that's a given. We have the neurological OS. This is the neural system that's working within the organism. We have the social OS, which is the neural system taking on elements of the environment in terms of other existing creatures. So this is the structure. This is the basic structure, and all of the things that we're talking about have to happen on the level of the neural OS, because that is the inner operating world from which the social OS is built, that takes into account the organism and the environment,
correct,
and the society and its own inner workings. So that's the self-reflective element layer that we're dealing with when we're talking about the areas of concern. So that means that we are trying to coax the neural OS to reflect the structure, and we're doing that by introducing social OS elements into into the social OS itself that sees the reflection in the neural OS for those reflections. The reason it's this complicated is because the neural OS isn't necessarily built for external communication and all of that kind of deal. So when we're talking about words, when we're talking about language and all of these communicative elements,
Right.
those are way up higher in the social
And you're
OS.
kind of subject to coalescence.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a bridge barrier there in terms of we were looking at
Symbol and grammar.
We're looking at a higher level operating phenomena, and we're trying to deal with the lower layers that make it happen. So how do we coax the lower layers to be cognitive of the upper layer processes and maintain the lower layers that it's built out of. So so
Right.
this is why the social OS part becomes so simplified into these little tiny categories that we're calling areas of concern. We're limiting their reach, so to speak. And this looks like that. It looks like hygiene, nutrition, rest, and fitness, and they're basically small little correspondences to the structure. So hygiene deals with the environment for the most part, but it's a broader subject in terms of inner and outer environments. Nutrition is obviously the intake of materials into the organism and the expulsion of waste, which incidentally is also a type of hygiene. It's like structuring your inner world and expelling the garbage out and all of that kind of stuff. It's still it is still a form of hygiene. So nutrition is an extension of that. Rest is the default, so to speak, mode out of which action can start, and it's a way to collect the energy required for any activity, really. And so it's something that the organism must do.
You're always having cycles of kind of in and out, like
Yeah.
tides, kind of.
Right, and again, this goes back to collecting and expelling and collecting. And so again, this is the same area of concern, but not. And finally, we have fitness, which is basically being in the correct context, doing the correct thing. So that that could mean exercise. Obviously, that's like the easiest way to appreciate that. But fitness really talks about being fit for the environment that you're in. So this could take many different forms. Yeah. So that's the basic structural rundown of what the hell we're talking about. Why it's structured the way it is. So
And hopefully we can dive kind of a lot deeper into what does it actually look like in a daily life, and how can we kind of represent this with visual representations.
So, aside from the areas of concern, this is why I got tripped up earlier. We have what's called the natural concerns, which are more representative of the holarchy. So the natural concerns are shelter,
Actually, I have the chart here. But shelter, sustenance, maintenance.
shelter, sustenance, maintenance, and society. So those are the broad categories that the organism and its environment is supposed to do and concern itself with. And so that's the main category of focus, and the areas of concern are ways to deal with that framework. So far, does that make sense, do you think? Or did I skip a few places? I think I did.
I'm sure we did. I wish we had a better chart for.
Yeah.
And why is that? So YouTube chat doesn't work on this one. I don't know what its issue is. It's gonna put a giant monkey on our screen. So that's the natural concerns lined up with the natural hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I should have probably mentioned the natural concerns earlier, because shelter is what you carve out from the environment, sustenance is what you bring into the shelter, maintenance is what you arrange the shelter to be, and community is how does that shelter interact with other shelters within that environment. So again, you have that looping situation where the environment and the community are kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
and
no, I think it often helps to kind of just even re-explain something or give a different perspective, but like to me, like shelter, sustenance, maintenance, it helps to look at it in terms of like the hierarchy. And as we've spoken quite a bit in the last few streams, the stacking phenomena of holons, how holons kind of stack and kind of clump together. You get a whole bunch of holons roped together, and now you've got a new holon on a different layer. This kind of stuff. So that new holon on a different layer, when you're talking shelter, it has to shelter these constituent holons. They have to be a part of it. In other words, that's what you're kind of bringing up, that this is the archetype. These have to be present.
And that amounts to sustaining them and basically bringing material in through the shelter to make sure that they are working in working order, and taking things out of that shelter to make sure that there's working order. So that's the entire function of maintenance within the hierarchy. And as you can see, that is the job essentially of the neural OS to maintain the organism within the environment. And again, the neural OS is where we're concentrating on the areas of concern, because we're talking about perceptive phenomena. We're not talking about abstractions necessarily as they are thought of, but rather as anything is experienced as it comes. So the very basic area of concern is hygiene. And hygiene, and I kind of already touched on this when we were talking about shelter, environment, sustenance, and all of that, in the framework of taking materials in and expelling materials out, and the appropriate ritual, if you will, of doing that, given what the situation might be. And hygiene is essentially a way to remove barriers between you and the environment that you're in. In particular, the social environment, but also the analogy could be made that if you have a lot of baggage and garbage, and so to speak, it's hard to move through that environment as well. So
or find what you want.
Find what you want. It's like it becomes impossible to sort of map it out, which is essentially what we're trying to do. So that is essentially the first step, is to make sure that you are working from a, so to speak, a neat place. And another another argument that is made for this, I've made for this myself, is that it's a lot harder to actually be in your community if you reek, for example. If people can't sit beside you and not vomit, and not vomit.
So these.
So this is like a basic barrier removal activity that one should undertake, and because it's so prevalent in everything else that happens, it has to be the basis of all foresight,
right?
All
yeah.
So here's the meditative aspect of it, is that no matter what it is that you're doing, you kind of have this overlay word of how do I do that and keep hygiene? How do I do that and keep that gunk off the next phase? And how do I don't let entropy set in and collect on whatever it is I'm doing and wherever it is I am? So that's the basic of it. I hate my nose. Sorry guys, I'm going to be doing this all day.
Yeah, so we're looking at some very basic behaviors in a kind of personal context, which can be extended out into the world, into any context, any system. You have to maintain the hygiene and all this kind of stuff of a machine, of a car, of whatever it is. So just a quick note: do these areas of concern, do they line up with this the hold-on stack, or
Yes, the natural concerns do.
So which
and
to
then
which?
the areas of concern.
Let's line them
straight
up.
up,
So
just linearly.
from bottom, so
Yeah.
hygiene at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
So where market is, it should be hygiene.
Because I want to, since we're talking about this is kind of a major subject. I want to just place them in right here. So it's not fiat commodity. So
No,
these
this will
are
be natural. This will be areas of concern.
areas of concern, right?
Yeah. Natural concerns are simply given. This is what we have. We
Right.
have a community. We have to do maintenance because we are an organism. We have to sustain the organism, and we have to be sheltered. Without those things, there's no organism. There's nothing to be concerned over. And while you do that, I'll be back.
Sure. Areas of concern: hygiene, nutrition, rest, fitness. Here we go. We have a new image.
Awesome.
Look at that. So that's correct?
Yep.
Looks correct to you?
Yep. Rest is maintenance, but perfect. Nutrition is sustenance, of course. And fitness within the community. Being a fit member of your community makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
Explain
this-
rest, though. Why is resting have to do with maintaining a balance between
Well, if
inputs and outputs?
if you're only active, if you're only ever active, you're going to run out of steam.
Right, okay, so this is like collapsing down a little bit. Like we're kind of collapsing.
Yeah. So they're not meant to be like one-to-one mappings that are like this means
exactly.
that, this means that, this means that. This is sort of to give you an idea of how to orient these words so that you kind of put them in the correct perspective. So when you're talking about nutrition, hygiene, and rest and fitness, you really are doing this in the context of community, in the context of maintenance, in the context of sustenance, and in the context of having a shelter. And why?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the givens: the environment, the organism, the neural OS, and the social OS. Those are the things that are active to do this, all of this kind of stuff. So it's all to give it more of a perspective rather than to give a direct prescription and formula to follow.
Mm-hmm.
There is a formula that you can derive from the areas of concern themselves, which is what we're going to get into, and that's going to amount to taking on a meme, expanding it to the memeplex, and creating an entire meditative state out of this, so that your perspective bubbles, so to speak, so perceptive bubbles, so that the lens that you see the world through collapses entirely into these categories, so that
Mm-hmm.
So there's
You're having a consistency for one.
yeah, it's to internalize.
Recurrence, regularity.
It's to internalize and habituate this process to the point of where this is the process that is overlaying the rest of the active life. That would be kind of the point of the internalizing it and creating a meditation out of it, and basically having the inner and the outer completely be the same thing. For lack of a better and less esoteric description.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the idea, is to habituate the mind into this lens. So,
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of something, but it's not coming.
well, this is the breath meditation that we're going to get into. Just throwing it out there as a statement.
Or the basic meditation, as we call it,
Yeah. I mean, it's no secret.
which
that
doesn't have to be breath.
No, breath is the choice simply because
It's always available.
it's always available. It's not an object you have to find out in nature somewhere to stare at to get a reflexive
Mhm.
sign back. But also breath allows for the full process of meditative cycle without the need of any further tools.
Right.
Whereas other tools will tend to need supplementary things.
Which
this,
is
this for
interesting.
that, this for that, and this for that.
I'm sure there have been
breath
books,
is a unifying
books written
framework.
on just breath and the
Oh, yeah.
meditations. Because, like, I know I've encountered and even discovered, like, 10, 20 plus meditations just on breath and the different ways that you can go with it.
Yeah, what we're going to be doing is much more specific. A lot of the meditation frameworks that I have encountered, they work for specific goals that we're not interested in.
Right. So we're interested in illuminating the memeplex and the processes that go on when you try to focus on an object in and of itself, and what happens when the APS explodes.
I wouldn't phrase it that way. Eliminating the memeplex is not possible.
Illuminating.
Illuminating. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Yes. In that case, yes. The ideal result from the meditative process, I'll just put it into mimetics terms, is to move from the concrete spectacle, move one's idea of consciousness from the concrete spectacle down to the memeplex. So to break away all of the what I would generally term dead AI of our mind, like the machine learning that sits on top of our perceptive abilities, to sort of see
The
past,
autopilot.
yeah,
if you
to
want.
see through, right through it, and essentially see how your mind builds it while it's building it, so that you
Mhm.
can see the fact that it's actually made up on the spot.
Now there are some dangers, you could say. I don't know that we can possibly give or an opportunity of informed consent. If anybody wants to try and follow through these meditations, you may wander down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's actually one other reason for focusing on the breath, is that it tends to not
Kind of ground you, keeps you grounded.
it keeps you grounded, and the things that you tend to follow through are built up slowly, so that sort of it gets controlled.
Yeah,
more.
ideally, yeah. Everybody's experience is different, though.
If you want to go through the truly psychedelic experience as a perceptive, then you should know that that's a tall. It's like walking a tall tightrope. It's an
Mhm.
incredibly
Dangerous.
it's the shortest path, sure, but it's also the one that is like the easiest to fall off from.
Mhm.
So there's a definite correlation with graduality and being remaining grounded more remaining far more grounded without going through what some people call the dark night of the soul kind of thing. But it's also probably the most dry and the least exciting method. Whereas the psychedelic methods, where you have tantra and where you have visualizations,
Right.
they can be crazy interesting, but not necessarily illuminating. If you're not prepared for them, they're not going to be. They might not only be not illuminating. They might illuminate the wrong things.
And you may find yourself with associations that aren't productive, but that end up tearing away at your reality, anyways.
Yeah, and if you've gone through the whole ego destruction part, you can become depersonalized, and that's
right.
That is definitely not the desired outcome of
like nihilism
of the practice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
could be dangerous, and this is an interesting point.
So that's why I'm an advocate of the slow path.
Some people say, "Oh, we can just dose everybody, put LSD in the water, right, and like that's gonna fix everything." Right, and there's an intuition that says, well, people just kind of realize that the experience of living life is actually psychedelic, then suddenly we would just wake up.
Yeah,
but it's not that.
But the problem is that people prefer the dream. So, people like the Matrix analogy actually really works here because some people really like the dream. They enjoy it. They get to eat their steak and it's juicy and it's
and they're an actor in Hollywood.
Exactly. So there's definitely a lot of barriers on that front. So you can't. So yeah, definitely a volunteer basis kind of a deal, and right off the bat there's this whole danger, depending on where you're coming from, where the method that you choose need to be correct for the person that's choosing it. The method that I'm illuminating first.
That's it. I'm testing the YouTube chat.
Is specifically to get to the point of the most common denominator, and that's the breath. I'd like to add it beyond the breath. My personal what I would gravitate towards suggesting is the devotional. There's a devotional practice which is actually simpler, and is harder to understand initially, because it doesn't seem to follow a particular strategy, but the strategy is actually implicit in it, and that is recitation. And that, which means cycling a thought through the mind on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another different kind of meditation I'm probably going to get into as a counterpoint, but I'm going to leave it. I'm personally going to leave it at those two. Pragmatic kind of stuff is harder to. There's nothing to really explain because, in a pragmatic sense, it's more about getting a flow, and then sort of working through a flow and paying attention to that. So that's not really there's not a whole lot of instructions that can be relayed from that front. So, but that's another simple meditation. And I already touched on the psychedelic visualization kind of stuff, which has more to do with trying to assert the world in a more mythological way, and then following the roadmap of that mythology in terms of seeing the world as a representation of that pattern, and then learning how to navigate that pattern real time.
Okay. So you're talking about the different paths towards the same goal, depending on temperament, essentially.
Yeah.
On how you prefer to perceive information, how you're comfortable with it.
Yeah. So the breath meditation would be the lowest common denominator, and it's also the most academic one of them all, in that it simply focuses on the memetics and nothing else. The psychedelic one focuses on the mythology, so methodologically speaking, it's very intense and a lot less mechanical.
Mm-hmm.
So, really, this is a difference between implicit and explicit. Some activities do something for you implicitly, the other activities do it for you explicitly. So, breath is the most explicit and simple.
Fine. Cool.
Shall I get into it now, or?
So, and this is going to help us to illuminate something that we got into before when we wrote down the cards, right? So, in other words, the fundamental guild. Fundamentally, in order to be a member of the guild, you have to be you have to have a certain roles present.
Implicitly, at least.
Right. So membership role, network, and proximity. That's network.
Yeah.
Mediation. So the mediation role and the network role.
Yeah. So by virtue of being a member, essentially, you know that there are other members. That's just a matter of knowledge, and that there's a way to speak to them. That's the matter of mediation. And the fact that you're speaking to them, that's the matter of network. So now you're recognizing that, and that's part of your map, and therefore now it's self-reflective.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the point of these words, really, to create that self-reflection again in the social context. Now that the neural context is established, the social context is reflecting that.
Right. So when we do the breath meditation, we are focusing on a single meme, the breath, and trying to expand that. So that's our whole perception in the moment. And so what happens when we do that is we go from the concrete and we jump up layers, or we jump down layers. So we're seeing different layers of perception happening.
So, initially what would happen is that you'll see all layers jump at you all at once. So you'll start to feel the breath. You'll start to think about the breath. You'll start to visualize air going into your lungs. You'll start to visualize pressure and or feel pressure or feel wind, and like there's going to be a bunch of different words, a tapestry of words surrounding this one word breath, all having slightly different connotations, slightly different meanings.
Right.
And what the point of that would be is to illuminate that a single meme has like a vast expansion potential into different categories of interpretation. And when you limit the focus to that single meme, you allow only its interpretative information to fill your memeplex, so to speak. And so the entire memeplex becomes self-reflective of that meme in different ways, and now you have this big structure that you can look at that says breath and its entire, so to speak, complexity to explore. And now you can understand, not necessarily understand, but you can start watching. Looked at this way, it becomes a certain way of looking at it. Looked at a different way, you get a different connotation and different expressions of the same thing. And then as you're following this, you're starting to. The idea is to start to see how your mind navigates these words to form its concrete illuminations of the internal meme that's not being replaced. So the meme, so you can look at the meme being the same while changing its interpretations constantly, and eventually get to the point of where you are seeing what causes this interpretation and what causes that interpretation, and how all of that is navigated by your mind and presented to you, rather you being the force that decides what to make of each meme at any given time. You're going to actually start to see the presentation given to you.
Okay, so I think you're trying to bring up something that we discussed on the ride here, like body, sense. What was it? There's like the 4 categories. Again.
So Buddhist meditation takes the breath meditation and uses the categories of body, affect, so organism, the full organism itself as it feels within the
body, affect, and these are the things that are coming up as you meditate on breath, right?
Yeah.
So body, affect.
Affect being the pleasure and the pain. And then
Or
the
neutral.
mind. The mind is being like, is my mind expanded? Like, is it flexible? Is it currently rigid? Is it currently agitated? Is it currently relaxed and pliable and all of that kind of stuff? So you can make comments about your mind that way. And then furthermore is like the mental qualities that come up. So that'd be like so the various conceptions, various basically you'd be looking at it much more mechanically. It's like, oh, I have conceit rising up. I have like I have equanimity rising up within me. Like you'll be able to see like the further qualities of the mind in terms of like it's more abstract notions. It's like, what is it building?
Or is it more concrete?
It's hard to say because the words don't really match at this point.
Right. Or if we're moving up the stack, then
because like now, because you can conceive your mind and then say, okay, now I got conceptions about mind alongside conceptions about affect. So the previous states don't necessarily disappear, but your view of them becomes much more detailed, and you start to see them as elements of things that come to you, and you can sort of see what your responses would be just by watching and observing and not trying to interfere with the process itself.
Right.
So that is the entire point of the meditative process, to get yourself to watch those things as they happen to you and remove your notion of, oh, I'm controlling this to make it happen this way, but actually step back and see that no, these things are actually getting presented to you by your AI.
Okay, so what you're bringing up, I think, is a very common trope, you could call it maybe, which is the observer. So like becoming, quote unquote, the observer. So in other words, you're kind of stepping back and noticing things is a very common meditation.
Right. Except I would point out that it's not possible to become anything. What you're doing is you're allowing yourself to see what's already there. The only thing that's different is the perspective that you take. You remove the I from all of it and just sort of allow it to present to you what your I had always been.
Right.
Which is actually a foreign object.
And things keep
created
happening.
for you.
Right.
With that,
Medic hazard
beer
alert.
attack.
Unmuted.
All right. So with that, I actually want to point out that we didn't actually change anything from the Buddhist treatment of it. If we can go back to that image.
Fine. Which?
Grr. The same, the three, yeah,
This one?
this one.
Cool.
So, the actual, our treatment of this meditation isn't any different. If we look at, if we are mapping the meditation to the natural hierarchy, actually.
That's mine.
Yeah. And here's how it works. Natural hierarchy and natural concerns. So the Buddhist meditation is body, affect, mind, and conceptualizations, basically. Well, if you look at the hierarchy, what you have is the environment and the shelter, right? So that's what's the first shelter that an organism has? That's its body.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so paying attention to the happenings of the body in and of itself consists of the exactly the same reference point.
Right. So we're expanding this breath meditation out into
Yeah.
simply the
So-
body
so-
of the organism.
Yeah, so let me just clarify that. What you're paying attention to the word breath, and you're relating the effects that you have from paying attention to it to how to what is happening with the body. So that's the first focus point. So you would start to analyze your breath in terms of your bodily motions, your internal
Mm-hmm.
expansions, your internal contractions, your the wind coming off your nose, all the physical qualities of the breath that you could possibly like relate to as they are happening. This is your focus point. So this is why body and shelter kind of match within the framework.
Right. Sustenance, I think, is simple. If you try hold your breath, how long is that going to last?
Right. So this is the pleasure and pain reference point. So once the entire body is sort of once the body is internalized in the breath meditation, it tends to fade away in terms of providing feedback, and it transforms itself into pure pleasure pain responses that you can pay attention to. This is a very difficult stage to get to, so don't be thinking that this is something that needs to happen like fast, because you won't get there unless you're really into this stuff. But the feeling of the full body starts to transform itself into pure pleasure pain sort of responses that you can now abide in and sort of pay attention to their further manipulation of processes and mental processes and whatnot that are happening. Then you're jumping up to the next layer, which does all of these things by being pliable and expanded, sort of accepting or not accepting of circumstances. So that's your mind rejecting or being receptive to what's happening to it. And so all of these affect things that are happening are actually a result of the mind operating in whatever mode it happens to be in.
Right.
So an agitated mind would serve different pain responses than a relaxed, unagitated mind, for example.
Right.
A rigid mind would have trouble coming up with different responses than a pliable one, and so on and so forth. And you can start paying attention on that level. And again, to get to it is an incredibly difficult feat, because that you have to actually surpass the affect itself.
Right.
And to get to the affect itself, you have to surpass the body.
To see that it's all kind of stacking on top of each other, and
Right.
the mind, it becomes like, let's say, traumatized and all this and rigid due to bad affect, but not self-seeing itself, that it can kind of let go of that and more flow better.
And then the final thing is like, well, what is making the mind pliable? What is making the mind rigid? Like, so those would be the conceptualizations that are occurring within the mind in and of themselves that affect it to the extent that they do. And now that's the final sort of stage of this meditation, where you're starting to piece that together and seeing how that has the effect of trickling down to the pliability, to the affect, and then furthermore to the body and its reactions to the rest of environment. So
and ultimately the body is, we're just, it's all a system trying to just maintain the body in state, so it doesn't decay and decompose, whatever.
Yep.
Yep.
So that's the full meditation.
But it goes very wrong. This goes very wrong in many ways. And I guess that's what we're trying to unpeel here, sort of.
Well, the focus is broken constantly by extrinsic concerns. And this is where we have the commodification spectacle play a role, and why branding has such a problematic issue, in that the things that get stuffed behind the words are not necessarily the same anymore, and so the lower layer algorithms don't work out to the proper conclusion. So the reification is wrong.
And so we target the neural OS.
The neural OS is what's doing the operation,
because that's kind of where we are, and that's what we can affect the change at.
But the social OS is what's providing the pieces to work with, because you can't communicate with yourself on a neural OS level. You can't. You can feel affect, but you can't explain to yourself, oh, I felt pain on a neural OS level. That's the social OS level, which is more abstract and dreamlike, right?
So then we're coming top down,
Yeah.
I guess, from...
So we're using social words to inject into the neural flow of things.
And we want to make the mind more pliable, to loosen up what's been
But we can't feed
constricted.
We can't feed it its raw material, so we have to sort of encode the social elements to make it work a certain way. So it is a kind of a trick of the mind, mental gymnastics, if you will.
Yeah, that's very very
that's
sketchy so far. I think that's the screen. We've covered a lot, but I don't know if that's...
Well, I can actually bring this home with the encoding decoding stacking.
Do you think it would help?
Well, what I'm saying is related to that, because what we are doing is you're
I
taking a
wanna-
word. The word breath, for example, does not exist in your neural OS. The word breath exists in the social OS.
Right.
So when you're saying to somebody, think about the breath, you're injecting a social artifact into the processes of the neural, and letting the neural to sort of take that object, and so what other social elements is it? That's the interpretive part. And looking at that functionality is what gives you the ability to see the neural element of it.
Now, I want to bring in another...
That's where the trickery is, if you can call it trickery.
Bring in another chart here, if this is the right one. Not that one, but maybe that one soon. This one here. So we're talking in terms of shared, right? So beyond... So this is kind of like where things are real, where things are present and all this. And so there's a horizon, right? But the mind gets tricked into thinking that this is what's real, this kind of surface.
Right. That trick is served by the narrative, because it takes objects and strings them together into a consecutive structure of meaning. Right. It doesn't see the objects underneath the meaning. It only sees the narrative that is made up. The analogy being is that the mind works with frames of a movie, but it works with them so fast that the illusion of a motion picture is the only thing it really thinks that is there.
Exactly. You don't notice it. So what the neural OS is mechanically doing to compare something. I looked at my garden, a week ago, but now this, and you kind of have this story in your head that it's just been growing. Meanwhile, all you did was compare a frame from before. This is the captured frame of this state of the garden to this state of the garden currently, and you have another frame on top of that comparing these two, and this becomes a story. So you think this is a smooth running story.
Yeah, the smooth running story is actually taking those two frames and making up the in between them.
Right. So between these dotted lines, this is the kind of neural OS layers, we call them.
So whereas perception itself, like of the objects that you're encountering, is more like a shimmering dance of things appearing and disappearing out of your cognition.
Right.
The interpretation aspect of it, the way that these objects appear to the mind after the fact, is through a stringed together narrative that's tied all of these shimmering images into one single hyper object, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And which is another we don't have it here, but narrative and hyper objects are synonyms in our conception for this.
Right. We do have.
It's somewhere out there, but
We do this one, right? It's
no,
it's not that
no.
one.
We don't usually use hyperobject
No.
because hyperobject is part of.
We use narrative.
It's part of the
Normally.
abstraction studies, so it's an academic subject. So
Right.
I don't tend to include it in these kinds of diagrams.
Right. So we're talking about meditations, and so above the top dotted line, shared narrative here, that's kind of usually that's what we use to inject things. That's the playground of smooth reality where things feel like real and all that.
Ironically, it's beyond the horizon, so we don't actually have access to it. It's something that we cognitively make up as we go. We only have access to the perception of the shimmering perceptions that we get.
Yeah, like you could believe that the garden that there's growth and little things happening. The plants are taking sunlight and all this. You can believe that it's happening.
But again, that these are objects that are appearing in your cognition below the horizon.
But when you look at it, you're getting a snapshot, and recalling a snapshot from before, putting this together.
So that's the point where all of that is to say there's a horizon there, and that's kind of its nature that we're trying to illuminate there. And
even a car driving by on the highway, it's here, but now it's there. You fill in the gaps.
So, yeah. So this brings us to the cognitive alignment window, and what the meditation is supposed to be doing is actually moving that framework from the illusion of living in the narrative spot to the correct view of living in the concrete below the horizon, where your actual perception is happening. The movement of that window allows us to accept the mimetic structure below the objective abstract structure in the APS.
Right.
If you don't do that, you tend to mistake the abstract structures as the full underlying mechanism,
as the fundamentals,
as a fundamental mechanism that obscures the mimetic layer underneath it, the mechanical aspect of it.
So
and obscures the ability to see that you're making this up as you go.
We've now pointed at, I think, probably one of the key concepts here, maybe, in my opinion, and how you see people behave and all this kind of stuff, and even your own behavior, that your idea of what is real, what is reality, all the types of things that can happen. Let's just take your state, and you can go into this context, in this situation. You're going to believe a certain worldview, a world. You have a world going on in your head that matches things, and that's that because this is happening. You know that's a chair, and people sit on it, and this and that. These are abstractions that, without this type of meditation, you believe that to be existence itself in a universal sense that doesn't change. Right? You've already made your bed, and now you lay in it.
Yeah, you don't take into account the fact that this is part of an interpretation.
Right. And so the child, the baby, newborn, has none. Basically, this is a blank slate, and that gets created. So this is another kind of mini meditation: is to think, well, you were a child once, and yet you learned things, and still you keep learning. But we become crusted and crusty, and we don't want to keep learning. And
Right. If the
be
abstraction
comfortable.
if the abstraction layer is not penetrated, if you don't penetrate the abstraction layer, you don't have a reason to really manipulate it, to see,
Right.
to give yourself a reason to change its own input into your cognition, and so you become
Rigid.
yeah. Like, I mean, obviously we're generalizing. Okay, I mean,
Mhm.
everybody is different, and everybody
And everybody can learn
sees
from new situations that come up, right?
What we're trying to say is that some of this stuff people know intuitively, but not explicitly like this.
Mhm.
So all we're doing is we're trying to illuminate that aspect of it.
Right. We're making a structured model that can be used for bootstrapping this kind
And
of
so
stuff.
just to give an idea as to what the alignment window is doing, is that when it's misaligned to the narrative that is the default, actually, you tend what gets mistaken for the abstract is the actual concrete perception of the spectacle itself. So the objects that appear to you in the narrative, right, become the constituent abstractions of how narratives are created. And so when you're trying to assert their patterns, you're going to be jumping down to the abstract layers, getting all their types, but then you won't have any other reason to say, okay, but what makes up those types? Because now you're in a self-reflective layer, and you've completed your picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's a self-referential picture, and so you don't have a reason to say, oh, there's something below this building all of this up.
Right,
And so
and
the
there's
whole
no,
thing gets forgotten.
and also any kind of nuance between categories is generally
Right.
just poo-pooed.
And not only that, but the suggestion that there's something below or something else to it becomes kind of like a suggestion of craziness. Like, how does that make any sense? Because we already got a fully blown self-referential system.
Right.
It's all logical. How is there anything below that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the trouble with this horizon,
And-
in that if you don't recognize that there is one, or don't artificially tell yourself basically to watch for it, you don't have a reason to step further back into the mean building element of the mind.
And this
where-
is big for politics and all the stuff we got into last stream, like political correctness and all this kind of stuff. Just having categories and just projecting them out onto the world, and condemning people for being this category or that category, which is, my side is like this, and setting the battle lines, but you have no option.
There's a great word for these battle lines: opposite. The opposite. It doesn't matter which side you're on, you're the same.
Right.
You're opposite, but the same.
Yeah, that's in opposing something, you're reifying its opposite, and you're saying that you are its opposite, but you're defining yourself in terms of
Mhm.
what you're not.
Yeah, not only that, but like you might paint yourself on a completely different side of an issue, and morally, right, like intellectually,
But-
word-wise,
Mhm.
but behavior-wise, exhibiting exactly the same
And
behaviors.
you're simply propagating and propelling.
Yeah,
that.
so for example, with politics, why is left and right opposite? Because they are both very keen on having powerful people tell powerless people what to do. It doesn't matter what the issue is. The fundamental problem with both is that they're both keen on just retaining a system in which there are a segment of people that can tell other people what to do, and there is another segment of people that absolutely cannot do that.
Hmm.
And so long as that's the case, there are just going to be two sides of the same coin. So as far as politics go, left and right are same problem, share the same problem. In particular, that of retaining a power system.
Right, so we want to be able to practice on our own some certain meditations which can help us to unrigiditize our neural OS.
Or if it is rigid, to be able to see it, or so that it's seen. the awareness of it is what brings about any resolution. So that's kind of like almost an implicit aspect to it. The goal isn't. While the goal is to resolve these things, the activity isn't centered around resolution, but awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So awareness is the key to the model that we're presenting. And
Sentience.
radical awareness, you would say. One that not neglects the autopilot, but deliberately suppresses it as a cognitive function.
Mm-hmm. But doesn't sentience do that as well, basically?
I should rephrase that. You don't suppress your autopilot, you make your autopilot habituated into awareness such that
Right.
you are habitually aware. And
Yeah.
your autopilot
So awareness
is aware.
becomes part of the autopilot.
Yes.
And again, so awareness, sentience. So I'm trying to see if there's any distinction.
No,
here,
there isn't.
because we were talking about it before.
Because if we're looking at it from the stack perspective, this is just allowing things that are already happening to happen, without presenting further resistance, without
Right.
adding layers to it, without
And so,
without siphoning the energy from it to build some irrelevancies to disintegrate later.
and there's a big tendency for things to go that way, to crest up, to form battle lines and all this kind of stuff. And what we want in the moment is to be able to step back and pull and to utilize these tools that we have
Yes.
to realize that
It's not just a tendency.
our worldviews are created internally. They're made up and they're dynamic. They're
Yeah.
not rigid. And a category you give to somebody is not what they are.
So to take the point is that it's not that we have the tendency, is that we have the capacity, and the tendency to do it is coaxed out of us by the environment that we're currently in. The environment that we're in, aka the social environment, the system, the civilization and whatnot, is coaxing us
Right.
to become very rigid
Heavily decayed.
and underutilize all of that, and
Mm-hmm.
more interestingly,
Yep.
to fear the utility of the mind on this front, such
Yeah.
that it doesn't disturb the delicate,
The system.
fragile, operational, conceptual house of cards that
Mhm.
is the system.
Yeah.
Because it's very sensitive to these perpetuations.
Right.
It's an interesting system in that it posits itself as a necessary evil for survival, but its truth is really that the only way for it to survive is for us to believe in it. So there you have that.
Hmm.
So yeah, as far as that belief goes, the only way that is feasible is to insert into every child the notion that it's not possible to escape it. So that
Yep.
every adult grows up with the same notion and doesn't want to.
And this is just reflecting and bringing back all the previous live streams we've done. Like we built up so much into this kind of this moment, I guess.
Yeah, this is the core activity that our little Portal Mountain is actually suggesting. As far as activism goes, as far as being something in the world goes, actually it's not that glamorous. And really,
It is though too. On the other side, it is glamorous, depending how you look at it.
well, it's novel. It's novel in the sense that it's not a product that you will find on the market, not in this way. So you can't really you can't really approach it that way.
Mhm.
And it's novel also in the sense that the kind of power that perceptive manipulation allows for oneself to do, given really, really atrocious circumstances of the environment as it's given to us by other people. It has its own sort of island to oneself.
Mhm.
It provides a shelter to oneself, as a natural concern
Right.
itself. It is a way to provide that natural concern,
And
as a means to provide further natural concerns to oneself.
not only to oneself, but in the context of social, in the context of the guild, we are actually building something.
Well, since membership sort of dissolves the self-other dynamic in many ways, that does bleed into it. Yeah. When you have several different people with the same mindset, that says, okay,
Right.
we're doing these natural
And
concerns.
I know a lot of people who want to just do that, but don't have the framework for it.
So when you're all interested in maintaining the shelter, right? Like all of the activities are going to be negotiated not out of self-compromise, but they're going to be negotiated based on the necessities of that shelter. There's what kind of self-compromise is there when it's towards both all involved benefit? There's no compromise involved. It's an accumulation.
Right.
It's not even it
And
cannot be
it's a learning
compromise.
process too, because nobody knows what the best shelter looks like.
No, it's a heuristic. Shelter
Mhm.
should not be thought of as a static thing, like a body. A body is
Mhm.
not a static thing. Like we shed billions of cells daily. They just die and we shit them out. So
Or scrape them off.
no, yeah, mostly we shit them out. So billions and billions and billions of cells get replaced on a daily basis. So shelter is not a structure. It is a structure, but it's a process. It's an activity,
Right.
in and of itself.
Hmm.
In fact, everything is an activity. When we're talking about carriers, when we're talking about agents, when we're talking about grammars, when we're talking about the actual polyverse structure, there's nothing that can be not an activity because it's all like these messages getting passed around on carriers.
Mhm.
Shelter just happens to be self-resonating a bunch of messages that create an illusion of a shelter on some upper level layer that other things utilize as a shelter.
Mhm.
But does a shelter really exist? That's a moot point.
Now, this is kind of making me think of the bootstrapping of the guild. So that in itself is very complicated because you have all kinds of stuff. You could look back at all the live streams we've done, and all of this is adding up to a giant map of what needs to be transferred from one to another to see
Do you
and
remember-
act as part of the guild.
So do you remember the bootstrapping explanation I gave recently?
No.
Where it's like you take an agent from a
Oh,
stack
we talked about it, recently.
and you just inject it into
So you're
an agent and a
replicating.
medium.
Yes.
But this agent, because of the message that it is, just grows the stack out of it.
But into a new agent, basically, or a new set of
A
agents.
new stack.
Yeah.
A new stack of the same species.
Yeah. So
So
yeah,
this is
I
re-
like that definition. Bootstrapping is
So this is the same process, just on a very different layer. Like
Right.
we're taking something that's this big, condensing it and encoding it into a medium, which is hard work,
Mhm.
in such a way that it has to grow out from that medium into the full thing again.
right.
So that's
by
the difficulty.
people viewing and interacting.
Yeah, exactly. So this is giving a birth to an actual creature,
Right.
by definition.
So
and
we
if-
are approaching sufficient complexity at this moment.
It's fuck.
I'm sure we are approaching sufficient complexity.
I'll be right back.
Break time, ladies and gents. No.
I just thought it was a funny thought.
Yeah, so I'm sure the quality of the microphone there is very high.
I said nothing. Nothing.
So, just interesting thought, and this goes back to something we talked about a long time ago, and we have, which is the like this kind of like viral payload envelope idea of a whole social replication of culture, going from one to another, so compressing through the media, like what we were just talking about.
Speaking of viral, just to make a point there was a conversation I had with Vicky a little earlier on in the week, and the point was made. We were making the whole female-male mythology analogy thing, and if we were looking at the compressing of the like the compressing of the stack into a medium and bootstrapping it into another medium.
Yep.
What we're looking at with a virus is actually exactly the same phenomenon. It's just over a wider range, like a parasite, if you will, like any other parasite that has a cycle that goes through many different animals, for example. The viral, the virus cycle, if you will, simply is a different way of seeding the soil, if you will. It's just a different seed and the soil happens to already be self-sufficient. It's just using that as its soil to create more of itself. So it just piggybacks on these processes, and doesn't need to evolve further complications.
Yeah, so this idea of a virus basically implanting information into a system to make it change.
Yeah, which is part and parcel of exactly the same system to begin with as it operates normally.
And so this is something that we have to think about if we're intentionally creating a type of spiritual, religious system, cultural system.
True.
That there's information coming in a package, and it has to have effects.
And it also paints the picture for what a stack actually is, and it's not a singular self-replicating element. It's actually a stage for multiple replication systems. Most of which we consider to be,
of course,
negative, but not necessarily.
Yeah, like think the virus has to first penetrate like the outer wall of something and then get in. And so that's there's agency in that, and then there's agency in interacting with the proteins inside and the mechanics.
Yeah, it just paints the picture that stacks are not as self-isolated as we'd like them to think. It paints the picture that when you go down the layers, things do get more complex simply because the signaling mechanisms take into account further and further and further noise that to us might be seen like noise, but in other contexts, like in the virus's context, is its own replication system. And so, a lot of piggybacking is happening at the same time, and a lot of siphoning of energy is occurring at all layers, basically, including that of thought.
Right. And so any society replicates itself through education. You're always seeing this. There's always people being taught in a certain way, and whatever tends to work gets passed down traditionally or through institution. So you're having like a system for bootstrapping the next generation always, right?
Which happens to also bootstrap extrinsic systems that it's not intending to. So like you were saying, this is something that we need to actually understand in this context as well, so that it's not, as you're using this model, for example, it's not being it has dangers
unintended
of
consequences.
It has dangers of being misused. Essentially, like every single concept on this planet, malicious intent it's not safe from it.
And that's
it cannot be safe from it.
That's why I mentioned informed consent. Like and as a kind of disclaimer to this live stream, right? You can't for certain things you can't have an informed consent, because to be informed is to already
to concede to consent.
it's already happened. If you're actually informed,
You have to be consenting to be informed, to be informed, to consent, and so you're stuck in a catch-22. So
Right.
what this amounts to is
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
trust, and trust being a leap of faith in people.
right.
Um,
So we're saying it's awesome. Something
it's
like
it's
that.
just something inescapable as a consequence of what it is.
Yeah, I see that civilization is going this way. We're pushing ourselves against a wall, and this is kind of the thing that has to come out, let the cat out of the bag, in order to help deal with all of the ill effects of civilization, all this kind of stuff we've been seeing.
And unlike, well, I guess, it's not like we're like most doomsdayers, speakers, or whatnot.
No, we've laid out what's happening in pretty clear terms, I think, as far as commodification of all life. Like, that just is what it is. And we can take that as a tool and say, okay, let's kind of see what happens if we reverse this process and take responsibility back for our own realities, and see how that goes forward, how that
Yeah,
how that reflects out in society.
yeah. Like there is an apocalypse and an Armageddon, so to speak, in our parlance, in the sense that if,
Which I don't think we've discussed on stream.
in the sense that if, first of all, apocalypse is the word for unraveling, and unraveling,
Revealing of truth.
yeah, well, unraveling of truth as well. Like, if you have a big mess to untangle,
Mhm.
it's the untangling of the mess.
And
So
it's also when you see the extremes and the limits of your current system,
So-
that's an apocalypse,
so from-
because you're seeing it happen.
So from that sense, the word is legitimized by what we're saying, what we're talking about, and Armageddon being the cessation of the structure as it is, the tower,
Right. Which doesn't have to be bad either.
Uh,
Although
it depends. It depends if it does not have.
there is a controlled
if there's-
Armageddon.
If
we
there's
have a
nothing to
control-
fall back on, it's disastrous.
Right. So there is an uncontrolled and a controlled Armageddon.
Yeah, and obviously our goal in this sense would be not only controlled but radically controlled Armageddon, in the sense of
Right.
while the social structure does need to disintegrate from its existing,
A fully apocalyptic, radically controlled Armageddon.
right, like while it does need to disintegrate as is, it cannot disintegrate wholesale and collapse without recourse.
Well, as we
So-
talked about the commodification of all life, there's so many plateaus we've gone past. Like,
Yeah.
we need to kind of recoup some of those things so we don't die if things go bad.
Right. So
Basically.
the idea isn't to just crush the system and then just be done with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that leaves a lot of people dead.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all what the aim is. It should sort of, as it should be displaced with something already
Right.
pre-existent. So
And this is making me think, oh, what motivates people ever to possibly start paying attention and take responsibility and all that? Oh, a disaster? It's like the chicken and the egg. What actually motivates people, enough pain, to change?
Yeah, that's the problem with the
It's a
pleasure.
catch-22.
This is the problem with excessive pleasure, in that it masks the underlying grind.
Mhm.
And instead of removing the grind, it's increased and drugged away in terms of
Right.
drugged away out of perception, out of active perception.
Mm.
Either by senseless hobbies or by actual drugs.
Right. So, so what we're looking at is a cultural package construct which helps to bootstrap this kind of recuperation of what's been lost through the commodification of all life.
Okay.
In a kind of viral sense, viral payload type thinking.
Which begins by shifting the focus away from commodities to their utility in the framework of the organism.
Framework of what?
Of the organism. Which means that if their utility happens to harm other organism within the same society,
Mhm.
which is global, then the utility does not make any sense, and this is the driving mechanism behind of relieving the organism from frivolous activities to begin with, by removing the necessity of others to engage in these activities, by removing yourself from the need of them to engage in these activities. You begin to recuperate both sides, yourself and them, as much
Right,
as
and
possible.
that's taking back responsibility, I think.
Well, yeah, that's becoming responsible for what happens to somebody else, to
Mhm.
some extent, without necessarily knowing the details, and just taking the
Right.
abstract reality of it and working with that.
And so we've been trying to kind of drive towards a concrete implementation of this, of what does it actually mean in our daily lives to become more responsible. And so we've got this meditation we've discussed.
So that is an activity you can do with the tools you are, right? So the breathing meditation is the tools you are. The
Right.
next phase is the utility of your body and the expression of that outwardly towards somebody else. This is the card game.
Right, right.
So card game can be communicative, talking, or written down as supplementary material. But it always revolves around the same dynamic, the guild dynamic itself. The recognition of membership simply states that you're touching in on the same medium, you're touching in on the same point of mediation, and voluntarily agree to
Now-
have the communication mediated through that
So
artifact.
I'm not sure if we've gone over the meditation in enough detail right now to see how this kind of lines up with shifting the cognitive alignment window, and also I would say it's not misaligned normally. It's just this is the
It's misaligned.
this is the normal.
It's
normal way.
misaligned as soon as you start to define reality. When you start to try to define what reality is, if you're
Fine.
working from the
Yeah.
misaligned window, you're stuck with a blind spot.
Right. Yeah.
That
so-
blind spot ignores the mimetic layer. And without that layer, the mechanics of creation of all the types, of all the objects is neglected. And if you neglect that, you arbitrarily stipulate what is.
Right, in the rigid sense. So I'd like to try and maybe talk about this a bit more, discuss it, the meditation, and link that into how do we get to triad protocol, basically. So how do we get to the point where we can heuristically navigate a holarchy using the meditation, right? So
Mhm.
you talked about body and affect and mind
Yeah, so the
and
body
concept.
So if you want to start mapping this, the body will land on the narrative, the affect would land on the object, because all objects will create an affect.
So this
within
is
the perception.
reversing.
Yeah, you'll be climbing down, and then the mind
Right.
will be based on entirely in the kind of types it allows to propagate through itself, which will give rise to the mimetic happenings.
Hmm.
So it's a climb down. In that
Very
sense.
interesting. And that's how I've seen the meditation work, is that it comes from a more concrete sense, and you're kind of digging down into the layers.
Even more than that, because concrete is below the
Right.
shared.
Uber concrete.
Yes, super concrete.
Super concrete.
The concrete that feels more concrete than concrete.
Right.
Because the concrete actually...
That's where we start.
The
We're there.
concrete is a lot closer to quantum reality than what we normally think of as concrete. Things appear and disappear, and they
Right.
shimmer in and out of existence everywhere.
In that relationship with the narrative as being more of the wave.
Yeah. The image I like to use for concrete is moonlight in a calm lake, but not necessarily entirely calm, where you can see like little waves and shimmers of moonlight specks appear in each different space as the waves arise here and there and there and there. It's the same light, but it just flickers here, flickers there, flickers here, flickers there, flickers there, flickers there, all at once.
Mm-hmm.
Just everywhere at once. So that's kind of like what the concrete is actually like. However, because we're stuck in a narrative, we tend to blend all of these shimmerings together into a single solid, if you will, object.
Right. Oh, that's the moon.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that happens conceptually rather than perceptually. And that's the idea, to move from the conceptual to the perceptual so that you can break down perception rather than
Yeah.
conception.
So, yeah. So, conceptually, things are very smooth. The reality is smooth. There's no break between anything.
Right.
Perceptually,
it's a-
you're seeing different things are coming. You blink your eyes, you close it.
Yeah.
Pop, pop, pop. Things popping around.
It's quantum. Basically, it's
Mhm.
things appear and
And this
disappear.
is the point of that horizon is that we beyond that, like what we actually experience is that popping up and down of things coming and going. Beyond the horizon, it's smooth, but we don't actually experience that smoothness.
Right. But we believe it so much that we're willing to bet that the reality is there, and by that we manage to shift our cognitive alignment window to the wrong position.
Right.
In our ability to assess what is it that we're perceiving.
Good. So this is the basic meditation, is kind of drilling down into more and more abstract world.
To the point where abstraction disappears,
Mhm.
where you see it built up. And
Yeah,
that's
through
the
memetics.
That's the point of not neglecting the meme, the point of moving back into it, to allow the creation forces of the objective reality to shape, to be revealed in one's awareness, how they're shaped
Right.
by the mind rather than
Yeah,
being there
that's
as a
it.
given.
Is just we have a map being provided here, and through meditation we're trying to check out the terrain of the actual experience of how does this map apply.
So, two functions actually. That, what you're saying, but also to verify that what we're saying here is actually the correct assessment. So one of the jobs of the meditation framework is to not only assert that this is the case, is not to only utilize this and say, oh yeah, cool, that this is, I see all of this stuff, but to actually look at this model as well and see, oh, does this model actually appear within the cognitive awareness framework itself, and that is what gives it the validity to be the useful tool that it is.
Yeah.
Because without that framework being also verified, the leap of faith remains in superstitious mode.
Right.
It doesn't become reified to the one to your own experience. It becomes something that somebody else had told you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can keep in mind, sure, but to actually experience it. If you don't experience it, you can't really say that this is true.
And as to kind of tie it around too, this is the thing mapping itself, the mapper mapping itself.
Right.
So
If this mapping is not mapping itself, then something should be wrong
right. So
as you're trying to apply
keep
it.
meditating until the thing is mapping itself, which is doing the mapping.
Or, conversely, expose the problem. Right? I mean,
Discrepancies.
expose the discrepancies that come up, because this mapping itself is framed from meditation practice to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So its validity has to actually match
Right.
the meditative practice.
There's like
And if it
hundreds
does
of
not,
thousands, if not millions of hours gone into verifying this.
yeah, and if it does not, then the problem has to be exposed and worked on and then revealed, and really that's the only recourse that there is, because this isn't a truth claim that can be verified otherwise. It has to be an interpretive claim.
Mm-hmm. And so when we move down from the object level, things popping up and whatever, down into the APS, the abstract, we're seeing,
Division into categories.
right, so like you have a body of water and these little shimmerings, a shimmer, that's a shimmer, that's a shimmer, that's a shimmer, right? This is what it is. When you see the pattern, you know what it is, right?
Mhm. So
there's the sky,
so what
that's
makes
the
this
sky.
Yeah, what makes this shimmer exactly the same as this
Yeah,
shimmer,
it's
exactly the
just
same
a
as this shimmer,
and this
going
is
through a
these are
timeline.
right. These are all waves, right, here and there, crests of waves.
So it allows you to tie them all together into a singular object with properties
Right.
and behaviors and
a child
attributes.
looking at it wouldn't necessarily think like, oh, those are all just the same. They're like, wow, like these
Yeah,
are all.
if they have no context to tie
This
them
is
into,
like mesmerizing.
potentially, yeah. If there's no context to tie them all into, they could all be separate objects happening through time. But as we grow older, we see patterns. We
So you
tend
look
to
at the
assign
lake enough. You look at the lake enough times, and you're seeing
a certain shimmering pattern as a single
this
object.
keeps happening, and
Yeah.
there's just a bunch of that, or blades of grass.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so now to step down further into the abstraction.
So this is what we would call chunking, taking big chunks of information and making them into sizable
Right.
pieces
Right.
of for processing.
So what's happening a further layer down is processing of patterns and similarity, I guess, to recognize, to construct this,
So you're talking about memes?
to construct the types, yeah.
So it just breaks down that all of these different chunks are built out of the same Lego pieces, if you will, of the mental processes.
Right.
So signals.
And so, but
And
this
artifacts
is
and-
the intaking of any new and current information as you take it in, and you're like, is this the same chunk as before? Oh yes, it is. It's
Yeah.
always.
And if
the
it's
same
not,
chunk.
what kind of chunk is it like?
And oh wow, that's a really high wave or something, like that's a different chunk, and you learn that that's a new chunk. This is mimetic, so we've gone down another. So you're taking in the concrete experience and shaping what types exist.
Yeah. So what the meme does is basically breaks down all the different types into, yeah, this is just another meme.
Right.
How does this meme plug into the rest of the memes? So it takes all the differences and integrates them into the same ongoing system. And the only thing it really needs to move forward with it is whether it's positive, negative, or neutral in terms of
Affect.
in terms of its affect on the organism itself. How is it returning? What kind of feedback is it giving you back? And so the details become unimportant as much as the next as whatever the affective reaction is, which positions the chunk the chunk of information into its narrative context above the horizon as to what do we do from that point to move through reality further. So this happened, what do we do now? So it's a way to integrate that as a reality, so that next action can take place.
You mean like confounders, when something isn't expected, or?
No, I was being a cool, very generic. Give me a second.
Yeah. Break time. Kind of lost you there a bit on the last.
Okay, I'll check over here. I'll check the
Yep.
Alright.
So
what I'm
when
trying-
I said confounders, I was kind of thinking mimetically, like when something changes and you realize something's different in your world, and your type system needs to be modified.
Right, so the memes don't care about that because memes are structural components. What they do is they contain a bunch of references to this artificial intelligence element, the APS. Right? The database, if you will, of the mind. What things are. What does this symbol mean? What does that symbol mean?
Well, it has to because it bubbles up, and that's
Yeah.
its context.
So the memes, they're working on a lower layer than that, and they keep drawing from above
Right.
to say, okay, if I'm placed here, the narrative to go here. Okay, let's use this reference. Oh, it does this affect. This affect creates the disposition for the narrative to move into that direction because this is the identifier aspect from the APS again. Like, right? The meaning. If you attach this affect to this, you check the APS. Okay, the narrative needs to go in this direction. It's a structural thing that says, if I have this reference, where do I go? If I have this reference, where do I go? If I have this reference, where do I go? And it keeps those references from the upper layers that are meaningless to it.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a mechanism to figure out what to do next. How to move the needle through the
And you
vinyl.
keep saying affect. Is this like based on what's going to feel best?
So affect is pleasure and pain. A pleasurable response. It's a very, very subtle thing. A pleasurable response affirms an aspect of the narrative, so therefore it pushes the narrative in a specific direction. Pain response pushes away from moving in that direction to decrease the pain. And a callous response, it has a tendency to neglect the information, so it doesn't end up
Right.
properly getting integrated. So,
Yeah.
so it's a cause for ignorance, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So as it's doing that, this directionality of the narrative is being pointed to very strongly by affect. The next meme comes in, and it goes, "Oh, how does this affect this trajectory of this narrative, of the combined narrative that's already ongoing?
Right.
Right? How does this fit into it?" And then if it doesn't fit in really well, it's a painful response. We want to move away from it. If it's a pleasurable response,
Right.
it's an integration response. And if it's a callous response, it's more of like, I'm going to ignore
Right.
this.
Yeah.
And again, this causes ignorance. It causes relevant information to be neglected.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
yeah.
by meme, you mean like the new frame, a new
So
cycle. of the
each meme
memeplex.
is just a meme, just a meme. But it draws in a bunch of references. Each of those references are pleasurable, painful, whatever. Each one of those directs where's the narrative should be going because of its quote unquote meaning, as it's in that one frame. And then the next frame comes up outside as a result of that, and you're now trying to reorient what you just did together with what you're just about to do with, again, the ongoing narrative. So like it's a very complex interaction.
Yeah, it's in situation and feeding of always new information into the running plex of what's happening.
And normally that's a huge amount of energy, which is why it relays back to the autopilot that just simply takes in
Right.
whatever information it has and just says, this means that, this means that, this means that, this means that, this means that. And you just don't have to
Right.
think through any of these awareness.
So
And you're not going through this awareness
so
process
the
at all.
implication for me seems to be that being aware of the meme plex or the memes is, like you said, something much more high energy, and something that can end up modifying the world, the type space,
Yeah.
right?
Which
And we want to avoid that as much as possible.
Which is like your internal apparatus is resistant to it because it actually means spending more energy
Right.
in doing that, and more energy is usually associated with the flight or flight response, right? Like you normally don't need to get into that awareness state of the flow state so much unless you're doing one of two things. you're learning an activity,
Yep.
which is the relaxed phase, you're running from something,
Right.
which is very unrelaxed and very rigid in its nature. So, what we want to, given those circumstances, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the running state is like the relaxed state. By creating the relaxed state as the fundamental habit.
Wait, the running state like the relaxed state? I didn't
So,
get that.
so that when you are in fight or flight mode, instead of actually getting to the flight or flight mode, you'd be so habituated.
You just go into high awareness mode.
Yeah, you'd be so habituated to being in the flow of things, right? That even flight or flight would become a flow.
Right, and it could be as much as like a bad social situation.
Right. That you just navigate very, very awarely, with awareness, without without actually reacting to it.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Oh no, this is like this is mastery.
Yeah.
The point of mastery is to actually do it. The point of membership is to realize that, hey, this is what needs to be done.
Right, and in doing so, you end up showing others what to do.
Exactly. This is the point of where the hero returns, if you will, in the journey.
Correct.
Which is what Star Wars missed.
Damn.
Luke never returned. He never fixed anything.
That's it?
He killed the big boss and
Just didn't fix it?
he killed the big boss, but never told anybody how to not live under the big boss.
It's gonna happen again. Thanks, Disney.
No, that was Lucas.
No,
That
I'm
was
just-
still Lucas.
I'm kidding.
Disney just didn't improve it.
No, 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 no.
So yeah, it's that's the key. Strictly speaking, neither me or Brian is probably there, so please do not take this message as a authoritative
gospel.
from that perspective, because I can't stand having to answer those
Right,
kinds of
yeah, no,
questions
we
anymore.
don't, you mean that type of challenge or whatever?
Yeah, like
Yeah, we've got, a few years
strictly speaking,
under
it's
our belt.
it's a hypocritical point of view, because I haven't been able to actually maintain this kind of meditation myself. It's been difficult.
Right, but we're moving towards something that it seems like is becoming incorporated into our lives, for me anyways.
Well, yeah,
I
yeah.
know.
Like it's the light in the end of my tunnel, so to speak.
And there's the faith, whatever you want to call it, that what you're doing is right. Unwavering faith, I think they call it during membership.
conviction.
Conviction.
Faith has to move through to conviction, otherwise it's a waste of time.
Right. From
So
participant to membership.
that's a literal strict point, that faith as a tool is only useful in the participatory stages of any interaction. If faith cannot move into an actual conviction, then there's a failure either on the part of what one has faith in, or more likely, it's a failure on the part of the teacher to guide one through that faith into an actual conviction as to why that faith has meant anything to begin.
justified.
Yeah, meant anything to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So faith is a temporary, is a very temporary but necessary element of the practice.
So of course we're not perfect, or it's how far on our journey, who knows? But
So
we're definitely into something. And,
so the faith wouldn't be in us, actually. The faith would have to be given to both the model, and in particular the Grand Master of such model, which is a hyperstition in and of itself.
Right.
Much like the Buddha.
The Grand Master is risen.
Yeah, well, that's the mythological element. The reality to believe in lieu of having that reality asserted for you. Hyperstition.
Right. So I think we've got the meditation kind of sort of hopefully oriented for people to kind of understand that we're going from surface level experience of the world to kind of digging down into abstraction to see the mechanisms of like perception.
I've personally never gone beyond shelter body aspects of it because it's really damn difficult.
Shelter body?
Like beyond the first stage, essentially, beyond the first concern. Like even getting into affect is a lot of work.
Well, you've got anger issues, that's why.
Getting into affect is a lot of work. Anger issues. My God.
I'm just teasing.
I'm a fucking I'm a neural case, man.
It's all good in the hood.
I'll lose it on 4-year-olds. Come on.
Yeah, but like nobody was ever perfect.
Yeah, no. This is a hypocritical point of view. No, I have no problem saying I'm a hypocrite because it's impossible to actually think about it and do it all at once. It's not possible to do it without recognizing it. So, again, this is where education is number one. Not from a perspective of we gotta feed foreign information into the mind, but from like just understanding what the fuck you're doing to begin with, to be able to put it into words, is already difficult enough, since culture-wise, language-wise, which is culture-wise, what we have doesn't reflect anything in terms of in the internal experience whatsoever. Well, we have relics from the religious mindset, which mean absolutely nothing to anybody.
Like what relics?
Christianity, for the most part.
Common culture, you mean?
It's not a common culture, it's a sold culture, it's a spectacle culture. Christianity is sold to you on the market. It's not something that you practice anymore. To get to the reality of
knocking the roots.
Yeah, to get to the reality of, say, the message, if you will, it doesn't look anything like what you see in the church. It doesn't look anything like you see people do.
Okay, so there is a prosperity gospel. You know,
that's
like
a product.
Says, you're going to be, if you believe and you go to church and do all this, you're going to become wealthy and happy and everything's
just
gonna be fine.
forget that. Look at anything to do with Christianity right now and tell me whatever you're being told isn't some product being sold to you. Right? Like everything to do with it. Everything to do with it is marketing. Everything to do with it is marketing. Save your soul from what? From being bad. Why is you bad? And then they need to sell you why you're bad. They need to sell you what the sin is. They need to sell you crucifixion. They need to sell you a whole history.
Yeah, I get it.
They literally have to sell you a history that never happened to get you to even accept the story of it. It's mind blowing how far it's gone. Even though the internal message of it is freaking fabulous.
Well, that's the thing with commodification, and
That's what I'm saying.
for taking the representation as a reified, without understanding. So without this type of meditations that we've been talking about, you don't go inward. You don't find out that kind of stuff. It always remains surface spectacle. Right, and you've got relationships at church that remain as enemies. You could do this for me, and I'll do this for you. Like as a,
Yeah. So.
Or like these token, like, let's do a food drive for this thing, and then food goes somewhere, and who gives a fuck?
Yeah. So charity is a detached form of trying to trying to re-dignify oneself within a heartless structure.
Right. It's time and time again. It just this keeps happening where we seem to worship the representation. It's almost like
Superstition.
right. So this is the superstitious process where the image and appearance of something is way better than the actual effect. Right. And you have relationships which are shallow. Not that they all are, and that, especially if you go to a church, there's a much higher percentage of chance that you could find somebody who is actually tuned in spiritually, quote unquote, who has awareness, inner awareness, and this kind of stuff. But it's not the major thrust of any church that I've seen, is to be full on aware and present and like intentional.
They are by definition cannot achieve that because their constraint is the bottom line.
Right. Like my church is under a hell shitload of debt from their building. How do you, if you owe money as a mortgage, for an example, how do you do anything except have your annual meetings about the budget is this much and the budget is that much, that's all you fucking talk about.
So this would bring us back to the analogy of the virus and the siphoning of energy that viruses create for stacks and all of that kind of stuff. From the more esoteric polyverse explanation, this is the function of economy is to essentially use and is to farm and this land, if you will, off of its energy and its resources to facilitate arbitrary markets. And it does so at the expense of being able to sit there like human beings and communicate. Like you were just saying, like how do you sit there and just do meditation if half the battle is you got to worry about extrinsic situations which have nothing to do with anything but it's tokenism.
Right. And so when the tray comes around, literally you are paying money into the bank. It's getting shipped off into a bank account of the bank. Like some loan, some owner of the building, you're paying the owner of the building.
It's just scraping off the top. It's
savage.
But
we know why it's like that.
Legally, this is called what? Embezzlement? No, not embezzlement. When you scrape off the top like that, it's theft. What do you call those people that scrape
usury,
off the top?
But
no,
for loans.
No, like that, like like there's
that's
like
embezzlement, but
like how there's like a big bank account somewhere, and somebody's always like, I'm gonna scrape a little off right here. Nobody's gonna notice. Nobody's will notice this little bit missing.
Yeah.
So yeah, like this is the entire system. Is like humans grow, and mental processes appear, and they're just like all that energy is being directed and redirected into an artificial mechanism.
Yeah, and laundered through cash, whatever it becomes, whatever it is.
Right, that's stifled
here
that
and
way.
there.
Meat burrito, white flour.
Oh yeah.
Brown rice.
Getting hungry.
Pinto.
Should we take a little break here, maybe, or
no veggies. Chicken.
why don't they remember? Idiots.
Medium.
Idiots.
Salsa medium.
Yeah, it's cool.
And you don't want anything else, right?
No.
No guacamole, right?
No.
Burrito sauce and sour cream.
Yes. Market demands. Yeah. So the current state of religion is commodified savagery for the most part, but you do find people who have like been quote unquote born again, reborn, born of the Spirit.
Oh shit! I didn't do your cheese, man.
How could you? So you find people. No matter where you look, you still find people who have had these experiences and are looking to find other people. But for the most part, the religious and church system is just the machine like any other corporation. Not to say you couldn't, talk to the pastor and, maybe try and change things and have ideas.
Where's my order?
And that's where faith comes in, I think. Faith or conviction that the Spirit inside of you is also acting and working inside of others, and that some people, even in positions of authority, are amenable to that and want to talk about it and do some good in the world. So we can't just shit on the church and all that. But it succumbs to basically all the same typical stuff that the society at large does. In some cases because they have a mortgage on their church. And you literally will be kicked out of the building if you don't cough up the money. And how are you going to cough it up?
Yeah.
The collection plate.
And especially the fact that, your ability to provide money has to do with your ability to maintain some sort of stable income, and that being basically subjected entirely to...
And you really don't want to be too much like
to a
Jesus,
lottery.
because, kicking over the tables and whatnot of the money changers and, causing a stink and a storm, how long is that going to last?
Yeah, and people don't tend to like the shit disturber.
Nope. Especially if the shit disturber owes you money. And you're not paying. And the long arm of the law has something to say about that.
The long arm of the law has very interesting things to say, especially if you try to eject yourself out of the cycle. It will definitely, definitely try to articulate you in such a way that that causes you to have the lowest possible standing with any aspect of society, such that to the point that where you are absolutely shunned by it, by every standard. So yeah, that's the other element of it.
Yep.
People like to complain about cancel culture and all of that stuff being a rightoid element of cognition of how society deals with itself, but it's kind of interesting that
try going bankrupt.
It's kind of interesting that if your position is such that this entire system is somewhat flawed, that it doesn't matter what side of the fence you land on in terms of left and right. Correct. You're a complete failure either way. So what that means is that regardless of your position politically, if your position is such that you don't you don't agree with the concept of authority, you don't agree with the concept of society being the arbitrator and meddler of all of your affairs, if you find that to be off to any degree, then you are categorically classified by it as somebody who needs that kind of supervision, needs that kind of interference, and up until the point where you admit to the need of that, you are not free. You cannot even rid yourself from the suggestion. People will simply not accept that response. So
Mm-hmm.
if you decide that the system is not for you, then the system will decide that it is for you. And it will kill you before it decides otherwise.
Typically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So part of the whole Dark Night of the Soul is that if it occurs, is that you don't want to actually you don't want it to cause a social response, because the response isn't going to be one of understanding. It's not going to be one of support. It's actually going to be very
Right.
detrimental. It will especially make it a failure
So
more likely.
the return of the hero almost sparks a whole other Dark Knight.
Yeah, it certainly will.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Did you finished? Are you back on track? Maybe we should take a break. Short breaks. Be right back. But it sounded very, very, uplifting.
I was just saying that it got pretty dark.
Yes.
that negligence of the system does tend to be fatal. So
True story.
that's the other element that we're sort of dealing with in
As
that,
expected, yeah.
in this model, in that we can't assert a model that
Right.
becomes lethal.
And so our niche, as we talked about it last time, is self-help.
Self-help.
We're just
and
trying
and
to,
to think,
help.
market-wise, that's what we have to do. Yes.
That's how we market ourselves. We're no threat. We're making self better.
Well, we technically are not a threat to it whatsoever, because given our assertions, in our positions in it,
And
we
no
are
doubt.
we are very clear in that the recourse is not to turn away from the market specifically, because that is a death sentence.
Yeah.
So
And no doubt what we're
by
doing
no
can-
stretch of the
can
imagination
easily
are we going
be
this way.
recuperated. We're not against anything.
No. So that's not the message. Never will be. I think that's worth mentioning.
Thought I had some markers around here. Markers.
All right, place in order now.
Good plan. I know I had some sharpies. But where did they go? Where, oh, where?
That's my beer.
Where, oh, where did they go? So, I'm thinking like, I'm feeling like, yeah, just kind of like reiterating, kind of going over like what we wanted to approach or touch or go on with this.
The background's gone.
The orange is gone. We can put it back. Like, so this meditation thing idea is kind of front and center. I don't know that we haven't actually done like a full walkthrough, I guess, of that, but we've really kind of.
The walkthrough would be to assert the single word and try to have it become the only bridge between the experience of the body and the process. So
Right.
that breath
So
becomes.
the idea is you're isolating one thing, so that you're removing all the noise of oh, I'm in this environment and there's a couch and all this. You get
Yeah.
rid of all of that and say, okay, breathing, and then you kind of can break that down to there's the body.
Yeah,
There's how it feels.
and then
There's how the mind is dealing with that. There are the conceptions surrounding it.
Yeah, but before you get to all that, get the body acquainted with it to the point of where there's the distinction between breathing and body movement
Right.
becomes nullified.
And so this is supposed to make that bridge between the holonic modeling, basically.
Experientially.
So conceptual at the top, we were actually at the bottom, mimetic, right? Which, if you can link that, I don't know, can't link that.
No,
Off the
it's
top of my head.
it's to bridge conceptualization of breathing with the function of breathing to the point of where concept and function cease to be distinct. So that the word no longer means anything, but the breath is experienced in its full capacity. So all of the different distinctions about the breath, all of the different conceptualizations and things are brought together as far as one breath thing. And once it becomes unified as a single mean, with every aspect of it being it, that's where it becomes really difficult, because getting to that stage is actually a deep meditative experience. It's not something that you can just think about and be like, oh cool, I get it. that element of it, of like unifying the breath with the function of the breath, is experiential in nature. So you can't think it through. You have to experience it.
Yeah, and you can't have it just talked through to you.
And only
either.
and it's only at that point where you can move on to affect as a constituent, as the framework for the next stage, because
Now-
because affect is going to be completely derailed by bodily.
This, I don't know, this kind of seems all
Conceptualizations.
like probably way too complicated
Oh,
for,
it is.
for how it needs to be, maybe.
Oh,
in just
the very first
understanding
stage is
holonic
the very
architecture.
first stage. Getting through that is more than enough to springboard into the next stages, but going through this initial stage is incredibly difficult.
Okay, so I'll give you an example of one of my favorite meditations, which is to think about yourself having existed through life starting as a baby, in which you don't have any concept, you don't have a world. You're not living in a world. You're experiencing shit, right? And so to just to know the fact that you didn't know what a couch is, you don't know what a chair is, you don't know what a microphone is. At some point you didn't know, but yet you learned what those are through experience. So through experience, these lower layers of abstraction have been filled in, at least the lens of the APS, right? Mimetically, this thing has been happening all the time, and that's what we're looking at when we go deeper in the abstraction, that mimetically, the experience through time has led to a solidification of worlds of APS. That's what you need to know, right? Like,
Okay,
as far as the holonic structure,
so
like,
so this
does it have to be that?
this this is somewhat incomplete.
Fine.
This is
fill in the blank.
this is the Jainism sort of thing of meditation, where it's just like you don't assert anything and you sort of just let it fly. I don't think. No, this is like my Buddhist stuff coming through.
I'll admit this could end up ungrounded if you're just gonna roll with
So
something
the
like
Buddhists thing is simply, you don't meditate without a specific purpose. You gotta hone in on what is it that you are actually doing. With the breath, for example, there's a very clear disintegration process of the body melts into the affect and melts into the mind, melts into the mental qualities, and by exposing those mental qualities,
Right.
you now have tools to put
Yeah.
together something very, very specific. If you don't go through the process of aiming at those specifics kind of thing, you miss out on the ability to map them. And if you don't
So,
map
and this
them,
is the mapping of the self again too.
Yeah.
Because you're mapping into your context of your self experience.
and here's the thing: if you start to map them according to an inappropriate mapping, which is what Jainism offers, it offers an ontological matrix to map it across.
Mm-hmm.
You begin to be affected by that mapping, and therefore your conclusions are skewed by it. Whereas if you're trying to map out the mapping itself, your framework will not
Mm-hmm.
will
No,
not
I get
necessarily
you.
will not necessarily assume the things that you're mapping to as much. They will allow for recontextualization in different circumstances, and so it will not give a solidarity to the mapping as one would with an ontological matrix. So you will have, ultimately you will end up having a multiplicity of these ontological matrices to choose from, and each mapping is going to be unique to the moment as it goes on, and no certain meaning will have sway over the interpretation. You will always consistently
Mhm.
keep the multiplicity of interpretations in mind as you're going.
And I think that's because it probably grounds or anchors into the moment itself, the moment of meditation. And what I just said could be like a shortcut to kind of give an idea of it, but then you can run the wrong way with it.
Yeah, I express this through my own experiences. So that's where I saw the trouble point, in that when you assign an ontological matrix, you get into a problem where it becomes self-building again, and once
Right.
it's
Like
self-building,
so this
you
idea
can't escape it.
this idea of a human going through life from birth to death, of learning things and always shifting there. So it brings into view this idea of the world view that gets manipulated by the experience. So there's a relationship causal between concrete and abstract, which keeps bouncing back and forth, and that can be said to be mediated by the mimetic, but then you're still having this kind of abstract view of things, which
yeah,
can,
like because mimetics are an abstract view of mimetics.
right.
So you've brought that up to a layer. You've solidified the matrix.
Right.
But if you're missing the point that you've solidified the matrix, then you're missing the bit that's like, wait a minute, this got built, so it could change. And so this interpretation of the matrix can actually shift, which is why I keep mentioning Buddhism, for example, in that the model language that we're using can be shifted to the Buddhist language as been used before, and the message will remain the same, because it's not about the words that are captured. It's not what the words are capturing, but the dynamics of the elements the words represent themselves. There's no the words don't capture anything specific, but dynamics. Those dynamics can be represented this way, that way, the other way, and the third way. The point is the dynamics, not the words representing them. And so if you get stuck in ontological matrices, as I was saying, then you start to become superstitious in
Right.
terms of what is what. And superstition from the previous meeting is basically the belief that words are as real as the things that they represent. So
Right.
we want to stay away from that.
Instead of reflecting this through a deep meditation, where you just in presence.
Where it's not the words that make the difference, rather what the words are pointing to are the actual experience of experience.
Right. So many ways to go wrong.
Yep. Well, without education on the subject, right? It's kind of
So many ways.
still confirming. What the fuck?
Chill out, dickwad.
How do you not confirm? How busy are you? Getting hungry. So yeah, lots of tripwires. So yeah, any exposition, any representation is actually more of a. What do we have on Telegram? Because we've kind of not.
Oh, it's unrelated. Vicky talked about killing bears. It's cool. So you've got a wall of text. Yeah, so that's the meditation, which underpins whatever we're gonna do, like whatever we should do within the guild. The guild has this context of the fundamental guilds, and so in going down the layers of this meditation, we gain access to the fundamental guilds, leading to membership, mediation, network, and this is
Which are just realizations. Actually, they're not the kind of guilds where you're just like, hey, sign me up.
Right.
It's
These
actually a phenomena that happens to oneself.
these guilds are some. It's more like a signifier, like okay,
that you're
I'm
able
a
to-
member.
that you're
I,
able to-
I claim I'm a member. and,
Yeah.
and then you go from there.
The claim really means that, like, hey, I see you as a member, and I can communicate with you because I can see the network that I'm a member of, and I can understand the mediation processes, aka the language and the grammar I should be using to talk to you as a member. That's the the whole thing is actually a realization
Yeah.
of being able to do these things those ways. That acknowledgement, that understanding, defines membership. And that
Correct.
is something that nobody can do for anyone else. That is definitely something that one can only assert for themselves. So
Correct.
that's the voluntary bit that we kept mentioning before.
Yep. Whoop, up, up, up. I don't know where all my Sharpies went. Break time? Be right back. Chill, chill.
This is break time.
Chill.
This is break time conversation.
It is break time.
We're eating. Nutrition. Past hygiene. I don't stink, right?
No, you've passed. You made the grade.
I made the minimal contribution necessary.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna take a freight train down at the station.
Step away from that.
I don't care where it goes. Gonna climb me a mountain.
Callousness.
I don't actually know what the song is, so I'm just picking it up. I respect all music,
Yeah.
not
sure.
necessarily all the same. But
Fine.
respect negatively is still respect, right?
Fine. So I like that we've got the meditation kind of down, like that's a lot of
The
like
first step, yeah.
articulation there, which kind of leads you into an understanding of the fundamental guilds. And this is where I want to link into the game itself.
Yeah, like now that we've established that membership and networking and
Right.
mediation are all realizations,
So, yeah.
now we can put those realizations on a card and say what they are. What is membership? Membership is the realization that one is a member of a network, just in and of itself. That network is mediated, and so that gives us the network card and the mediation card.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So the very realization that
mediated.
you're a member is that you're in a mediated network, gives you both cards of mediated. So
Mediated
it's
through particular abstractions.
Mhm. So membership alone springs up all three. As soon as you have the membership card, right, it has to mention mediation and networking,
Mm-hmm.
and as soon as you do that, those two cards appear, and they're all self-reflective. Because you define the membership by them, you define mediation by membership and networking, and you define networking by membership and mediation.
Fine.
And it's a complete loop. And together, that is the fourth layer, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The realization of all three at the same time, yeah.
I gotta find my Sharpies. Where did I put them?
So as soon as you have all three down, you can put on the fourth card down, so I have all these three cards down.
Yeah, so, and I'd like to look at the board, which we just flashed a picture of the board. But like, so you can see a three-tiered structure here. And even this board can be cut in half.
Mhm.
So like this is my half, that's your half. And we share, so membership card would be there. And then certain abstractions can come off of here.
Mm-hmm.
And then concrete issues dealing with those could be there, or
Mhm.
whatever. Like it,
Sure.
we and I haven't articulated how the board works, or even how it
So,
should be designed.
I think what our biggest problem is when we try to articulate any one thing and we realize that it's always articulated by other things, we're not never putting them together co-horizonally. Because we are damaged goods to begin with, and we're trying to be piecemeal. Right? Like we're trying to use systematic thinking on model holistics, which co-arise, but we're trying to dissect. So that's the axial battle, if you will.
So isn't it always coming back to sentience?
It comes back to being able to speak truthfully. So, speaking, dream world interaction, right? You and I are in a dream world interacting, blah,
Right.
blah, blah. But
That's,
the key,
concrete.
but the key is isomorphic.
Waking dream,
If that
abstraction.
dream is isomorphic, then the connection is actually real, right? Like the connection on the medium is real.
If the map is isomorphic to the terrain or
Right,
whatever.
right. So dream world, reality world can intersect. The difficulty is in making the distinctions and making the assertions that that was part of the dream. That was not. Right? And that's where we're stuck. Like we're still damaged in that front because we have to use words to actually articulate the concepts.
So can you say damaged goods just because of that?
Damaged goods meaning traumatized, meaning subject to the system for so long that
Mhm.
we are having a difficulty
That
in
the,
breaking away from it.
The grooves in the record are very compelling.
Exactly. It's very difficult to jump out
Yeah.
and assert that this is a record
Yeah.
rather than keep playing it.
Oh yeah.
So we're still like by damaged goods I mean you and I, by definition, are not out of the book. It's a
Oh, man.
hypocritical assessment.
And this gives me a thought, like, I often think about, like, future generations as having been not so effed up, and then, and then potentially causing the cycle all over again.
Well, this cycle has been mentioned by the Buddha 2,500 years ago, if we were to go by the official
Right.
record.
So let's say awakening kind of happens in a global cultural scale, and then people, like for a generation or two, realize, oh shit, you have to pay attention, you have to be responsible, or shit's gonna fuck up, and then everything gets good, and then the next generation, right? And this brings me back to the cultural bootstrapping. If you're not bootstrapping something consistently, you're fluctuating, your pendulum swinging back and
Yes,
forth between
absolutely.
good times and bad times.
Civilization removed that context entirely, right? Made it irrelevant.
The context of having a solid state,
Yeah.
continual state.
So the
culture.
fragmentation of the narrative.
So we want to come back to a solid
What's
state
interesting,
culture.
what's interesting there is that we fragmented the narrative to the point of where it cannot reflect back to us anything of value about ourselves. The only thing it can now reflect back to us is brands, right? Like that's how far it got removed.
Well, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so the fact that we're wading through a layer of
And let's
brands
link this back.
is insane.
A brand is on the level of like narrative, right?
It's a mythology.
A smooth type of
Yeah,
thing.
it's a mythology.
You think it's just that. It's always
Look at
that.
commercials. Look at commercials themselves. They're myths. They're absolutely
Narrative. Yeah, perception
Entirely.
mechanics
Entirely.
illuminates that. The smoothness of the brand. Meanwhile, what actually is the product itself
none.
and the
There's none.
experience of it?
None. It's a garbage. It's fucking
Yeah.
garbage.
Typically, yes. Mm-hmm.
There's behind it stands a representation of money, nothing else.
Money laundering. Yeah, so a
The
solid state,
secondary replicator.
solid state culture. Is that, I don't know if that's
What
a
is a
term.
solid state culture?
What I mean by that is to be generationally bootstrapping the same culture instead of penduluming between,
okay.
It's so fucked up and bad, okay, we'll fix it. Oh, it's so good that we'll forget how fucked up it
Retaining
was.
the metastability.
Oh, now it's fucked up so
So
bad.
maintaining the pendulum at the top in a metastable state
Right.
versus letting it swing
Yes.
wildly at the bottom.
And back and forth. Correct. That's what we're looking for. That, I think, is a fundamental description.
No. This interesting problem that this presents. The pendulum sitting at the top of the metastable position is incredibly easy to
Inject with code which just
perpetuate
boom.
to make it fall.
It's a
one
lot
way
of
or the other.
it's because you're collecting it. You're negentropic. That's the negentropic ideal.
Right.
Is you're coming up to highest potential, and just waiting for something to come along. Yeah. Just waiting for something to come along. Boom. The code is injected. The whole system goes boom, and somebody reaps the profits off of it.
Again, this is the perfect point to point out what viruses are. They're part of this very same system. They cannot actually be separated from it. They are extra mechanisms to feed
Mhm.
off of the replication that can siphon the main core stack, if you will,
It's just part of the environment.
for its benefit.
It's just there. That's fine.
Yeah. And viruses form based on what is there as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're parasites built on top of the correct things.
And having its own tradition. Everything has its own tradition. So a virus has come through time, a long, long time, always co-evolving with everything else in the environment.
It's a feature of the mechanism. It's the entropic feature of the mechanism, and all it's saying is that the mimicry that you're talking about is actually besides the point to the full natural picture.
Right.
In that,
Just because something
in that
replicates.
it's also a fragment of another replicated structure. Some other thing can just be using a fragment of your replication structure for its own
Right.
replication.
And this evokes the whole holarchy.
That evokes maintenance. What maintenance should be about.
There's so many angles of injection of meaning to the system.
Yeah, like the whole idea of the polyglot, right? Those, for instance, the cake recipe that is actually the program for Hello World. This power to reinterpret code in a variety of different ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like to give meaning to one thing in a multiplicity. So on the one hand,
Polyglot. So this is like a collection of artifacts which can be interpreted in a number of ways.
So the interesting discussion
Everything
about
is a polyglot.
the interesting discussion about the schizophrenic for a friend of mine that I was posting earlier,
Mm-hmm.
where the part of the lecture is like mistaking a boxer to be incapable of separating the breed of dog from the profession of a human,
Right.
and to jump between
And-
being in a rink with a
Right.
Doberman.
So this is pattern recognition that the mind neural OS naturally does and wants to do,
Mhm.
but it shouldn't just explode out into every possible way of meaning. Otherwise, the brain, as soon as it received a single signal, would fire up into literally everything it knows.
Schizophrenia could be classified as a categorical failure of the mind to find the proper context for what it's interpreting.
Context is important.
Context is everything for
Context is everything.
It's how you interpret, because and notice that the context we brought into, say, meditation, the context we brought into the model has to be the context that you are. It has to be the organism. It has to be the environment. It has to
Right.
be the neural.
Like
OS.
the
It has
natural,
to
the
be-
natural holarchy is never not the context.
Right.
And this is what we mean by
And
the,
neglect of it is causing problems.
conditioning and patterning your behavior, I guess you could say, into that it's always, everything is a lens through this lens.
The second argument there is that the market categorically ignores this context entirely.
Right.
Because it ignores this context, it never caters to it, and therefore everything that it does is besides
Right.
that point.
In a secondary manner, it does cater to it in that there is demand coming from the body. Oh, I feel this, I feel that.
Right.
And then
it wouldn't survive.
capitalistically, oh, there's a demand on the market. Okay, I'll produce this. People will buy it.
Right, but
It's
then I'll
the
fake
detached.
but then I'll hide what the product is behind the dollar price and the brand.
Not to mention, I will only cater to the demand and not to the cause.
Right. Sure. There's that.
That's the main
There's no
consequence of the
consideration as to
disconnection, I
why
think.
things happening. There's no
Right.
consideration as to how the environment that produced that demand.
And maybe
shaped.
there can be. Maybe it can be woke like a church, but you still owe a mortgage on your church, which you have to pay. Therefore, donation tray has to be filled.
Okay, so this actually goes back to why the market system is actually a platform for engaging enemies with, not allies.
Right.
You
You're treating someone as the other by engaging in that type of systemic interaction.
how is it that you would push an ally out based on inability to pay a tribute?
To pay a what?
A tribute.
Right.
The tax of surviving in that space.
Tribute. Are we playing Age of Empires now?
That's what it is. It's a tribute. Every single existing individual has to pay tribute to the powers that
You
be.
played that game, right?
I have all three of them
Didn't
right
you
now.
play them? I'm sure.
I've bought all of them like recently,
Nice.
remastered for current hardware. I have all
I
of the
used to play
I
a lot
have
of
all of the
multiplayer.
campaigns.
Multiplayer with a lot of people. Did we play multiplayer though?
No, you'd kick my ass.
Yeah, maybe.
I've never been able to flood people with
But anyways,
soldiers.
on the topic of tribute,
Yes, market.
Um,
That's what you build the market for.
wood, please. Gold, please. Stone, please.
I did not order this big of a fucking burrito.
Beautiful. Yeah, you did. That's mine. Steak. Oh, are they both that big though? And charged for it? Maybe that.
Nope, the app did not charge me for that.
Good. Fine bonus. Now you get to feel what it's like to be a real man.
And not finish a burrito?
And eat a mucho in one sitting. This is a corporate sponsored live stream, by the way.
Fuck.
Here we go. So yeah, market, interacting with people as an enemy, using money to launder all interactions. Thus, there is no web of trust necessary or involved. Trust between the people is mediated for you conveniently by the state, who creates a currency.
It tells you who your friends are.
A universal currency.
It tells you who your friends are. It tells you who are not your friends. It gives you all the reasons for them
They
to
either,
be that. Those
in other
things
words,
by
they have
labels.
money or they don't have money. Okay, carry on.
Society labels people homeless. Society people labels lazy. Society labels people criminal. Society labels people whichever which way,
True story.
which may or may not correspond to the individual at hand at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows? Maybe those labels drive half of the freaking
Well,
interactions.
it
that
never
they-
really does correspond truly. It never fully corresponds. The categorical, and this is back to the APS and the worldview. How do I view you? Oh, that's a person on the
It's
street.
impossible to be
That's
that
a
static.
homeless because he is sleeping in a blanket on the alleyway. He is homeless. That is what that thing is. That collection of artifacts is called homeless. Mm-hmm. It's all part and parcel. And this blanket is the same as that blanket, is the same as that blanket. Buying on the market.
So you're talking about categorical thinking.
And all kinds of details get lost.
And that is a bleeding of type into object. It's
Right.
when the world
Exactly.
of type is inseparably mixed in with the world of object, in which types of things become reified objects
Mhm.
that serve as categories,
Yes.
labeling other things.
And yet you're looking at it, but it is the type itself.
Removing any need for individuation of the separate objects being observed.
Right, and this is called fungibility, not a market term. That one item is the same essentially as the other. So a $1 bill is the same as another dollar bill. This is a dollar.
What about the discussion about schizophrenia? Where this fungibility is the function of the mind itself. Where the mind...
All right, so you're unintentionally fungibling between types.
Between types.
So
Willy-nilly,
one
to the
object
point of where you cannot
one-
recognize what is actually happening.
Like, so you can't put together your context. That's what
Funny-
you need. You need that
funny
object,
enough,
and you need all the other objects currently being
Here's
experienced.
another statement about schizophrenia that is interesting. It has an onset of early adulthood, when the ability for your mind to form concepts is finalized. So the
Right.
time of growth
At
in
that
your-
point,
in your
that's
period,
when it appears.
it
Symptoms.
actually and it appears more often than not through really induced states of stress. So if you're susceptible to
Yeah,
it
sure.
happening, right, as your mind is forming in the latest stages of your growth into adulthood, if something derails that with stress sufficiently enough,
Wow.
you will actually not be able to form your frontal lobe so to the point of where the concept
That you
form-
trust solidity itself as a
you
like
become
universal.
incapable of separating it.
Right.
We can push
The
the brain.
categories, yeah.
We can push the brain through stress to be incapable of forming its final ability to be aware. That is
That
the
seems,
extent of stress that we have induced upon ourselves.
Mhm.
That's fucked up.
Damn, yeah.
And once that happens, there's really no recourse. Because
Like describing it as bleeding between types, like you're looking at an object and 1 minute it's this and the next it's that, or it's conceptual, you're talking about something.
and both scenarios bleed into each other, like seamlessly. This is society of the spectacle
Yeah.
to a T.
So there's
So it is schizophrenic.
So maybe you're susceptible to it, but then the stress pushes you over. So like
Mhm.
I don't think the average mind should be built to like get fucked up like that, right?
Exactly. Like this is at the time where you're building that infrastructure.
But it's
But
interesting
because
that
of
it's at the adult stage, right? Like the final formation of sentience,
Mhm.
intelligence.
But the schizophrenia of society itself, right? Because society is disconnected
Fuels
from
that,
itself.
yes.
It
And
it
the
re-
affect is just rolling down
It
a hill.
disintegrates that mind if it's,
onto you.
if it's susceptible to it. It disintegrates that mind immediately. It's just like, oh, cool, this is exactly what I am. Not the conscious decision or anything like that, but it just like part and parcel, like boom, fits right into a
Dang.
glove. Society's schizophrenic, the mind is schizophrenic. All of a
Right.
sudden, its functions are all under
Is
the
that
same
an
parameters.
interesting connection that something so acutely experienced within an individual human, you can find isomorphisms out into the social state?
I've been saying this for a while now. For instance, the parallels between
So a state runs on these categories. It can't not otherwise. It doesn't
the
exist.
parallels
in a
between up and down, like bipolar. The parallels between society and the bipolarism. Also, what the fuck is happening?
And so that's another thing. So describe
so
that.
The swing, so the swing in between absolutely being infatuated with something,
Okay, cycling, in
and
which we
then
were just talking
absolutely-
about.
and then vehemently hating it, just like being incapable of even like being anywhere near.
And on those long-term bi-generational cycles where things are so bad, so you finally learn, okay, I have to take responsibility, and then it swings back, and times are good, it swings back, and then nobody knows why times are good, and they stop having responsibility,
And yeah, and shit just fucks up.
we swing back. It's bipolar, yeah, up and down. I feel it.
This
I feel it.
schizophrenia is an ability to be coherent. Bipolarism is the swinging of emotions.
Right, but I think everybody.
Psychosis is the inability to recognize the real from the unreal.
Cool.
These
Yeah,
are all
right.
features
Okay,
of
so
society.
definition, psychosis. Yep.
These are all actual features of society itself. As
the
it
the
runs.
bipolar thing, I think, should be acknowledged that anybody who's gone through the hero's journey, Dark Knight, all this kind of stuff, has experiences that breaking through one an extreme, going to the other extreme, and then back, and then you kind of
Sure, the oscillation.
you
itself.
oscillate, and then you stabilize. Ideally,
The hero's journey, you will.
this
stabilize.
happens, right? So
in the hero's journey,
you
by
have
definition, you
major
have to
breakthrough,
stabilize.
and you go towards the opposite of what you've been experiencing,
iso-
just to see what it's like to be the opposite, and then you come slamming way back the other direction.
So you could say the oscillation in the hero's journey has to result in stability.
Right.
But
So in a
otherwise it's not the-
bipolar case,
otherwise it's not
so
the
that's the
hero's journey.
definition of bipolar then, as opposed to
Bipolar is where you start in childhood, sure.
hero's journey.
Sure. Those are all infantile traits.
Hmm.
Society is an infant.
Yeah. So we're normalizing the models of certain disease, mental disease.
But
whatever.
society is an infant. Being your parent
Right.
is fundamentally fucked up.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and we can identify that by making the models and applying them to society, saying, "Oh, how do you operate? What's my relationship between myself and the government?"
It's out of a parent and child.
Basically, I have no voice whatsoever.
You can write a piece of paper and say you're for something. You can say you're against something.
If
Can-
they
can you-
set up that to happen, that okay.
And can
now,
you
now
even
tell me,
But
do you
here's
like
the
this or
thing:
you don't?
can't even introduce the whatever the something is to
Exactly.
be for or against.
That's what I mean. Yeah, you sit there and take it. That's a relationship. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's infantile. It's infantile from their perspective because it's an infant and it cannot offer you more nuanced choices. It cannot comprehend nuanced choices.
They're not built in, and the interaction
There's
between
no
people,
self-reflection of the human in them.
any human you talk to, who is representing government, should have these protocols built into them to take your concerns to the cloud
Mm-hmm.
of government.
That doesn't happen because again, it's infantile.
Anyone in government.
There's only superficial concerns based on the
Right.
formulas of the system, and any of that
Yeah.
stuff is neglected entirely.
Right. That's what it would look like, though. Like
That's
it,
what-
it,
yes,
it
that's-
has to. You have to have feedback. That's what feedback is.
Mm-hmm.
This comes back to, so the government,
each individual-
the government mind as a model, a map that's constantly adapting, has to keep taking input from its people
Same mental DNA, right?
in everybody.
So
Yeah.
having the same mental coherent DNA to say, this is what constitutes the interaction between ourselves.
Like, and any member of government,
Selves.
any
yeah.
member of government, quote unquote, is an individual in themselves who is also interacting with government, right?
The distinction
So-
of government
so they-
and society should fade.
So they in themselves should see, okay, I want to influence things, and
This is why all members are part of the institute. The distinction between government and not government, it makes no sense.
right, exactly, yeah.
Because
That's a
government-
major bridge which is snapped.
Government's supposed to be just a bit of an abstraction on top of the
So
social structure.
anybody having a government role has to be running certain protocols, which should be self-obvious and evident to themselves, being a person and an individual who wants to interact with the government, that they should be taking in.
in fact, they should not be separate from what society
They
is.
should be taking in feedback from whatever their field of responsibility is.
So you're kind of hinting at representatives again. I'm saying different. We can't have that. There's no representation specifically. There's only enaction of something. like you can only be isomorphic with people. You can't be representing them. And that is
No.
a failure.
I agree with the representation comment, but I would say, does my like this what I said?
Representation is iffy.
What I said
It
stands
has to
in
be
the.
isomorphic and
Okay,
very,
it's,
very
it's
delicate.
what we're talking about, that in any position of government, you are also a nobody, a citizen. So whatever
Sure.
whatever you would want
And
to
that's why I'm saying government ceases
project
to be.
up to yourself. So
It's
as
not
a,
even a government anymore. It's still a member. See what I mean? Like the
as a
distinction disappears.
as a representative, you have to create in yourself a division of two people existing. One is that you yourself, the citizen, which talks to yourself as the government worker
But again, that's everybody.
and takes things in, and you are the same as anybody else,
But that's
just
but that's-
talking to this node. Do you see what I'm
Okay.
saying? Normalizing the layers.
Sure. But that means that the government layer and the citizen layer are not two different things.
Yeah.
It's just
No,
one
I know
thing
we've
acting
been
in
on the
two
same
different-
page the whole time.
Okay. But
I know
they,
it.
they don't know that.
Just clarifying
it's
that.
just one thing acting in two different roles.
Mhm.
One as the member, one as the institute. But what is the institute? The collection of members and nothing more.
Right.
No rank.
Mhm.
The mastery and all of that stuff happens when things get enacted, sure. You know, like you would pick somebody who's capable to actually enact an action, to do that action, but what the decision on what that action is not up to them.
It shouldn't.
Well,
Yes.
it is and it isn't.
It is, and this is the distinction. It's not up to them. It's not their decision as an individual citizen. It's they can give their opinion up to their higher self, which is running the social layer,
Mm-hmm.
to make to just be one of any other constituent who had told you an idea. Friends, like I'm conflating things like this is a network.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you trust certain people, they tell you this and that, you kind of put it all together.
That is the role of the institute and
The
why
point
it
is to not be biased, and that you as an individual, your opinion gets passed up to you yourself as this role.
So, so note this: the institute itself, right, as it is governed, is the master of every single corporation. It consists of all members. So, even though the decisions by executives and whatnot happen in the corporate level, and it is hierarchical,
Yeah, this is the
The-
strange loop. I see you connected it.
so the bottom layer becomes the top layer in the scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And so the corporate world is entirely held bound to the necessities of the memberships of the institute, of the plural institution. Because you don't need one institute, it's any institute. If you're a member in one, you're a member in all. So we're not the kind of, we're not nationalists in any capacity, like institutions are ephemeral?
Ephemeral. The institution.
Yeah.
Right, and we
It's
talk a lot-
It's a transitive space.
In this way or area, we talk a lot about the transitivity or the transient nature of corporations bubbling up to satisfy certain demands
and while-
demands of the institution, and then they dissolve.
Yeah. And while legally this corporation can remain on the landscape, what its activities are going to be are not going to be static. It can't be, because they're more of a front store face to the world for the
Right.
business interaction.
Right. And you can have sub corporations like.
They
A
form
corporation can, or a normal collection, a group of people who like to do things in
Well,
a certain market,
So this is the functionality.
can make a sub-corporation to do an institutional demand.
So this
right?
is the description of its functionality in legal terms from the systems perspective. What I'm actually trying to touch on is more like how it builds a shelter around the guild as a barrier for that interaction of market space versus guild economy, which is agile.
Hmm.
right? Like, because there needs to be a barrier, and that's why I'm saying, like, while the legal face of a corporation may remain the same, static to the legal
Okay,
landscape.
I see where you're getting.
It's internally the way it's going to present that as much as it can, the stable face to the market, while taking care of the needs of the, like, it's a sacrificial stance. It's not a profitable.
Ideally, there's always
No,
somebody,
it
somebody
has-
at the head of
This is
everything.
not ideally. This is by definition. Our
That, okay,
our
so when I say
corporation, that's what
ideally,
it-
when I
that's
say
its role.
ideally, yeah, right. Yeah, and we know, of course, that yes, that is what will be. But
That's what we
when I
define.
say ideally, I'm thinking like long term, like you've got all these competitors and all of the people and all this.
Oh no, we could totally play
Who
the
can you
spectacle.
trust?
You can totally play the spectacle on top of that. You can have the corporations battle each other on the surface, right? But feeding the guild all at
Right.
the same time.
Correct.
As far as the facade is maintained, it doesn't matter
Hmm.
because that's all the system
Yeah,
is
like
interested
that.
in is the facade.
And like I was kind of maybe alluding to, I think that gives credit to the like current systems, the way the things are, that these are already
It gives-
running experiments of reality.
Yeah,
This
and it
is
keeps
how
us
things
off the
happen.
off the radar because it's all behind the corporate shell.
And
Right.
but in
It's
not
still the
in not
same.
in other words, not saying that that is wrong,
No,
right?
like, maintain the law, maintain everything. But you build a barrier to, like, say, not to be called a cult, not to be that scene I described. What was it, last meeting, where a bunch of kids died? Like the pretense. So it was a compound, and the government.
Oh yeah,
Forces
Waco or
enter.
something we were talking about. I don't know.
Yeah. Government forces
Some conspiracy
enter
things or whatever.
under the pretense of there being abuse.
Shit that
which,
happened.
Which, at this point, can never actually be realized. simply
Government
because
came in,
everybody
slaughtered.
dead.
Slaughtered people.
So whether we wouldn't even know to this point, to this day and age, whether they were actually abused or not. All we know is that the kids are dead by the
Right.
government hand who tried to quote unquote rescue them from quote unquote abuse.
Right.
So outcome versus pretense is interesting.
Oh man, and
So-
how complicated the world is, even to navigate that, even as a state, to try and do the best thing for people. And you get swayed by, the image, right? The
Mhm.
spectacle of it. You feel you have to do something politically and all this.
So the only way to be in this world is to remain as a corporation
Mm-hmm.
and play the game as a corporation. However, use the corporate freedom because that's the only recognized inner world right now
Mm-hmm.
legally. Use that platform to facilitate the actual.
Well, it's what we all are. Anybody can claim to be running a personal enterprise. You're already seen as a corporation in the eyes of the state as being your name.
And so long as what you're doing is a product, seen as a product,
Yeah,
then
that's
it's
cool.
fine. And therefore stays
Yeah,
under
man.
the
So
radar.
it doesn't need to be justified. I don't even think.
No, but a lot of people will be curious
Mm-hmm.
about this thought process. So I'm.
Yeah, good topic. Like interfacing with the state.
It's necessary.
How to interface with the state.
Oh, simple.
How is your burrito?
Delicious.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's the motivation behind how we're building it, and why it's built this way, and why all so much business speak,
Right.
and why product, and why software, and why keeping away from esotericism. Not really, but still enough to make a movie.
Appropriating
Well, enough
some.
enough to make a movie. You know, Matrix. We've appropriated the shit out of the Matrix. Why? People,
Well, there's
people
a lot
know
of
it.
There's a lot of good stuff out there. But yeah, this is contemporary culture.
But
Right
those are
on.
reflections of the ideas. Those are also reflections of the siphoning of energy is a very accurate
Yeah.
metaphor.
Right.
The battery metaphor, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like it's exactly what the machines are doing mechanically. Extracting power
Yeah.
out of the living human. And the rest of the fucking
Yeah.
world, which
Power
it kills.
just available like a battery. You plug it up, hook yourself up to that terminal. You got juice.
You got fucking nothing, man. You got shitty entertainment as a compensation.
No, I mean the controllers.
Ah, yeah.
The
More juice, please.
controllers.
But the controllers are not. See, that's a false metaphor because controllers are part of the freaking controller board too. Like they're just batteries
Sure.
themselves. It's
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
like there's
yeah.
freedom there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And even on top of that, there's no freedom there because as soon as you step off just a little bit off of that tread line, guess what happens to you?
Right. Yeah, so
You're just swallowed.
in other words, you've got this sentience, yes or no? No. Answers all kinds of freaking chaos. Just blew me, all potential chaos. Yes, sentience, yes. You've got, oh, the narrow path. Hello, narrow path.
What are you trying to say?
The
Are you trying
narrow
to say,
path of life.
Are you trying to say us?
The narrow path of life.
Yeah.
Just evoking a common metaphor.
Yeah,
Hello.
like constraints.
It's
Constraints
not common. It's not common. It's not easy.
Freedom is a terrible word.
But what I'm saying is it happens at a root level, like thinking.
Not a terrible concept, but a terrible
Thinking
word.
holonic stacking and fundamentals. It happens at a fundamental level, whether you are negentropically inclined or feeding off on these loops of entropy.
No, I don't think there's a.
The narrow
I don't
path.
think there's an inclination. There's only pure potentiality. And there's choice. To
Right.
navigate.
So what I'm saying is the narrow path is something that's fundamental.
That's actually the trap of externalization right there in and of itself. If you don't have the externalized thing being reflected back to you, you don't need to make the mistake.
Right. Therefore, it's extremely fundamental.
As an animal who does not have to make that decision, you just follow whatever arbitrary path
Right.
you have, you're done. You don't need that. But because we externalize that path
Right.
and have created and have to have it reflected back as a meaningful ritual.
So maybe that you could
In
say that's
return-
like the fall of man, almost just goes into his own mind. Boom, just like squeezing
it's
it.
the fall. It's the fall of complexity in and of itself. It's as soon as.
But, wait.
it's a new layer of
So that
reflection.
layer, exactly, that layer has its own constraints, its own archetype, which is involving everything below it,
Right. And
which
if it's
needs
not
to be
constr-
satisfied.
And if it's not constrained to reflect the layers below it, it goes to shit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I meant by fundamental. I tried reflecting
and
that.
this is where-
narrow path starts there.
So this is where we make the point of convergent evolution. Why are there constraints on body types to environments? Because those are the body
Because
types
it
that
matters.
do work.
Yep, it
Those
matters.
are the narrow paths.
What
that
does work matters. Yep.
And so that's why
And
you
this
have,
is
that's why you
extreme.
have the same body
This is
shapes.
extreme fundamental conservatism.
Yes, this is our version of it. It is not. It is not at all like what people expect.
We're
it
gonna
to be.
clip. We're gonna clip that and share it.
It's
That
fun.
is-
It's way beyond the kind of fundamentalism that or conservatism that is usually applied.
And wait, since we brought that up, we should go
the
to
constraints are real
the extreme liberal or liberal
though.
on the other side is that
You don't use that constraint to say, okay, only your body type is allowed. It's simply the recognition of like this is the body type that works here. Like you can try.
there you go. Yeah.
You can keep trying.
Mm-hmm.
It just won't work. I mean, sure. I mean, something new, novel, might actually. That's not the.
Right.
That's not.
So-
That's not a complete constraint. This is where next layer is unknown. Like, and there's still room for pure potentiality. There's no restriction, and there's no coercion.
So
You're just saying,
what
that's
you're
like-
saying is don't be like Skeeter. Hey, pretty lady, your
Skeeter?
type ain't welcome round here.
Fuck Skeeter.
South Park episode at the bar, when Skeeter keeps saying like, "Hey," calling people out at the bar, your type ain't welcome round here. So
Yeah.
saying what is the negative, like I don't want that, I don't accept that. You could build up an infinite well of
Negativity that works
Things.
perfectly fine.
right.
You know, and this is the kind of society we are having right now, where you have one side saying this shouldn't be, this part saying it works perfectly fine, and it works perfectly fine, and yet you got these fuckers killing these fuckers for no goddamn reason,
Right.
because it doesn't work fine. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Yeah, my opinion is better.
And these people starving, and these people getting raped, and these people getting killed.
Yeah, because why should they be comfortable when I'm not? It's a whole different. That dynamic
We're
is more
pushed through a system.
That dynamic is more retaliatory than anything else. Like retaliatory to people that don't need retaliation.
Right, like, and that's kind of above and beyond even starving, because there's no
Yeah, this
food.
is- this
There's
is
no
where the
food,
art-
but
this
then
is
on
where the
top
art
of
goes.
that, there's like, let's hurt each other.
This is where the art goes through the abstractions to such a degree that nothing concrete remains. There are no people. There is this category of people that we need to get
Right.
rid of. Groups.
It's, yeah.
So the individuals
Mhm.
disappear before they disappear.
I'm just imagining being like an invading army, just raping and killing women and all that kind of stuff. Like, you don't see them as people individually, right?
No, you couldn't. Not at that point.
You,
if
you
ever,
would
because
you
if
fucking
ever
you
did-
would murder yourself if you ever
Because
saw
if you ever
that.
did, you couldn't live. Like it becomes
Exactly.
impossible to live with yourself, unless you are broken. Like
Broken.
that same
Right.
that same breakage that you
the
get with schizophrenia.
Great schism as well.
You can
the-
break the brain to the point of being incapable of rebuilding itself.
This is an axial war veteran,
So you-
categorized as unrecoverable.
Psychotic. Yeah. This is the psychopath. And again, this is look at the person, look at the society itself, and tell me that the psychopathic category does not apply to how the society is reflecting itself.
Right.
It
Yeah.
is a murderous beast.
This analogy again.
It will
Yeah.
fucking crush you if it doesn't live with you. It's neurotic.
So, like, we were
it's-
talking about schizophrenia and bipolar being built into the social, into society,
Stratum
into the
itself.
state.
So
Mhm.
the idea behind this analogy is to state that trying to get a coherent answer from society is not possible. It's not coherent.
Right.
To get a consistent response from the system is not possible. It's not consistent. It is bipolar. And on top of all, to get a personable response from it is impossible. It's psychotic. It does not see people.
Right. Yeah. Good reflection. Good to know.
So those are worthless avenues of pursuit. Worthless. You cannot reason with this.
Right, and this is like looking at the roles that we as people are taking on upon ourselves as role of Agent Smith here and there to be members of the state.
Yeah, we facilitate this behavior as well.
Right.
We are
Yeah.
agents of it.
So down to the ground, this is what we do. We can kind of choose our society or be unaware of it and
This is the-
educate it
this
and
is actually- this is-
bootstrap into it.
So the Jekyll and Hyde analogy
Yeah.
plays this role right there. the Jekyll and Hyde analogy is perfect for demonstrating why society will continue to function in this inhumane fashion, because the human, Dr. Jekyll, I believe it is victimized completely by the circumstance, right? But when it comes to behavior extrinsically to everyone else, the facade turns into a Hyde and Mr. Hyde, and all of a sudden
Has
it's only
agency over
as of that very same
Yeah.
hurtful system.
Just
it proceeds
dominating.
to continue doing the same
Fuck shit up.
functions to everything else around it, including
yeah,
itself.
that's a split personality right there.
So on top of being psychotic, it's schizoid.
Hmm. And schizoid in the term of
Schizophrenic,
mixing, schizoid is different than
Schizoid
schizophrenic?
is not being able to.
Oh,
wait.
so this is a
Schizoid
new
is
one
when,
then.
is when you are a person. When you, it's kind of like a multiplicity of personalities
Fine.
appear in itself. So like, person A, persona B, persona C, and they don't even talk to each other.
So this evokes the same idea.
I might be wrong
of,
on the schizoid.
of a singular topic or a singular context having branching out to many different contexts centered on that object type.
And
In
the
this
inability to move
case,
off the
the
concrete.
object type is the identity.
And the
or
inability to
self.
move off the concrete, and so becoming extremely superstitious. Not just a bit, not just superstitious enough to be hyperstitious, right? Which you can easily become. Like, you can use superstition for hyperstition.
Mhm.
The Witch in the Ice is a great narrative for that. Right? Like, there's no, obviously, but there is a witch, but there is no witch, but there is a witch. Right? Like, it makes sense.
No, I
from
get
that
it.
perspective. There's a force.
Sometime we should talk about that because I like that reification of when you know that it's something is a healthy myth or something to reify the identity into it.
But you can this is the currency problem. What we can reify is just splushes all over the place. So many variations, entropy just has field day with this.
Money laundering.
Well, as soon as you negotiate numerical values as mappings, you
Right.
can lose every
You're
arbitrary meaning.
quantifying.
As soon as
And
you
then
do that,
once you quantify, you have a market because you're quantifying into a certain format.
hence the market being the buyers. All of that jazz.
So just FYI, we got about 20 minutes left until the 4-hour mark, which I would like to take a pause at that point and break the video up because my
It's fine.
transcriber likes 4-hour periods, which are the greatest.
Fine, we can do it now.
Also, it shouldn't get too far off.
Yeah.
But then, okay, so we will now, but I also wanted to get into the cards, if we can.
Yeah.
The tabletop here that we have. And
we're like skimming on top of that already, so.
and just do like a kind of a wrap.
I
just,
think we're just dumping thoughts at this point.
Just do
so.
some jazz, yep. So we got about like 15 minutes left
Okay.
until I gotta shut this thing down. So
So
just
let's do
so
10,
we can
5 to 10 and then
Yeah.
let it go kind of deal.
just reminisce, recap, whatever's on your mind about these topics.
Well, outside of all the nihilism that comes out of it is the actual pure potentiality that is easy to neglect. And
The narrow path, the Buddha nature.
what's funny about that is that it's also neglected by said system and therefore is actually far closer to the heart than, or far more available, if you will, as something to utilize than you're ever going to be told
Mm-hmm.
by this system, because it doesn't
Right.
recognize it,
Yep.
and so it doesn't know what it is. It doesn't know what to
So
actually express.
this is why we have peer-to-peer education.
But you actually do find this to be true when you start talking to other people, especially when on the subject. This recognition that arises between almost everybody that there's something deeper and
Mm-hmm.
collectively better than what we are perceiving.
It depends on what level you're on. Like, there's something more to life, or there's something more to this, or
Everybody will say it, but everybody will say it differently. Everybody will equate it to something different. Few people will say will intuitively see it something beyond the current happenings.
right.
Most people will have the feeling, but equate it to something within the happenings. That's where we get the idea that devotional is actually an easier path for a lot of people to get through, because it utilizes this connection and exploits it.
Yep, the spectacle.
And exploits the spectacular aspect of it specifically by taking a very over-the-top spectacular perfection and allowing it to be something that's within reach of the individual who wants to connect to it.
Mhm.
So by facilitating that connection, there's a small bridge being built, and if that bridge is
And like
reinforced by
touching the mirror when Neo touches the mirror, and
but,
it
but
engulfs
the
him.
activity of reinforcing the connection is up to the individual, which actually does become harder than it seems. So there's difficulty in the path regardless of which approach.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that.
Yep.
Chop wood, carry water is going to have similar difficulties in that you're going to be trying to figure out how to not make meaning out of meaning and all that jazz. And are you chopping wood or are you
Hey,
carrying
we
water?
should convert this to Portal Mountain speak.
Well, yeah, but I don't know. I don't. I'm not.
No,
far
I'm
ahead.
just thinking like, so this is angles of ingress.
Oh yeah.
That's, you could look that up.
Well, that's why angles of ingress became a thing to begin with, right? It's this stuff.
Mhm.
Trying to correlate.
And
this stuff.
it's interesting what the path would be like depending on your temperament, of how you like to perceive information.
So this is
perceptively.
So this is assuming temperament to ingress 1-to-1, but temperament to ingress does not have to be 1-to-1.
No.
And you don't have to be a single temperament, and you don't have to be a single ingress. So,
Right.
So this is a 4x4 at least, conceptually speaking. It's like ideally like you have a tapestry of 16 different spots you can land on, and that's
Right. And so we're talking about now the whole package, the virus and the envelope and the payload, right? As a cultural thing, as Portal Mountain as a religious type, like, what would you call it? A memone? Memone was a word that I made up.
yeah.
It probably
genome,
sucks.
genome.
Probably sucks, but
It is a gene. It's like a gene, but a meme. Yes.
and it gives the same idea as like a culture who has to teach the next generations, and
replicate.
in order, yeah, to bootstrap the next, right? And some cultures have very conservative, quote unquote, very restrictive and arbitrary,
Restricted bootstrap
feeling,
mechanisms, we could say.
right? Yeah,
But they will constricted, not restricted, but constricted paths. Artificial scarcity would be the term for this. It's a systemic mechanism to constrain something to a domain,
Mhm.
right? Like, so.
This is the problem with the right, though.
So the constriction itself is actually natural because we're talking about making use of a medium or a carrier rather,
Mhm.
right? That's the constriction is a simple.
You have
but the grammar but the
archetypes.
grammar has to compensate.
So archetypes are bubbling up through the environment, and they each time must be sheltered. You're sheltering what's below. You're
Yeah.
conserving the stack.
Yeah, so immunity, the immunity guild has to be established upon each layer that builds up and then the next layer.
Right.
You have to create the immunity shelter around it.
So immunity is probably what gets wrapped up into the existence of the next layer,
Right.
because it
And
knows
and
how to
education
keep
models-
the archetype going.
Right, and education is
Mhm.
the model upon which community is being built for that layer. So it takes all
Yes.
it takes all the pieces and says,
Education-
okay, built them this way.
Education including self-discovery.
Education
Self-guidance or
is always
peer
self-referential.
guidance?
Education is
Right.
about education,
Of
and then
course.
about immunity, and then about the environment, and then
Right. But within education, you could have master.
And each guild,
Teaching you,
and
right.
each guild is a layer of complexity within the organism to become reflective of either the environment or something that's reflecting the environment
Mhm.
already.
Yeah, so
become a deeper reflection
I
of already something.
practically equate guild with role, and with these archetypes. With each archetype is going to have
Right,
its
and
own.
as you reach up the guilds, you get to wear more hats, if you will, to do more roles.
Right. So it's
you're
like
more-
a giant hat stack.
Yeah. So once you, so that's why that's the linearity of the affiliation itself, in which it's a progressive.
Right.
So,
Yep.
so and nobody at the top is ignorant of the bottom. That's like not a thing. You can't tackle
There is
this ancient machine
immunity.
without education.
So within the peer-to-peer network, the web of trust, there is immunity in letting people into the web.
Yeah.
Right.
You have to have that.
So that exists.
And well, that's why immunity immediately follows education, because education is the abstraction of what it should be, and immunity is the most fundamental shelter you can build for the organism.
It's saying this collection of archetypes operating to make this whole on must be sustained. Boom.
Yeah. Another way of putting it, if you're sick, you're not fucking doing anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. True story. Damn. So we've kind of taken the meta religion of last live stream and kind of carried it forward in the meta religion part 2. Maybe this could be called. We've introduced this meditation that kind of introduces you to this holonic structuring and a mapping of the self.
Which is the ritual that we were talking about, where, and this is the correspondence to the fact that since we've externalized our activity to the AI that's in our mind, aka our conceptualizing mind, we have to utilize a ritual within that mind to reflect back meaningful activity. And so what we're saying is that this meditative activity is the ritualistic
Mhm.
activity that the mind should pin itself on,
Yep.
so that their activity
And then
reflected by the body
Spills itself out.
is
outward.
actually
Mhm.
aligned with that awareness.
Right.
So that's the key there. It's the formulation of the ritual that is missing in the current systemic.
So you tried to link the strange loop again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm trying to reintroduce the idea of ritual as being the fundamental basis upon which activity should take place, but that ritual has to be aligned not only with the needs of the body, but also with the commodified spectacle, such that it can transform those brands that
Yeah.
are currently given to
Yeah.
it into actual meaningful
Isomorphic.
items and objects that are unique to the narrative of the person, with which one can finally become empathetic with, rather than sympathetic with all the artificial shit that is fed on top of it.
Hmm.
So that one needs to become sympathetic in a recognition of, yes, it's there. That's what sympathy is about, is taking those things as artifacts and giving them proper context so that you can reformulate what's brands you're given back to their meaningful, objectified spectacular objects that you actually may
Well-
need in your narrative than not.
So we need to be able to unpack at any point of spectacle, I think.
Yeah.
I think is the key.
That's ultimately it. That's a huge processing and
So that basically wraps it up for the first portion. I'm not going to say half, but
Yep.
we'll be back to do like some tabletop protocol, deck protocol.
I think better when I'm walking around,
It works. It helps. So yeah, we're at almost 4 hours now.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us, people, and
We'll be back.
yep, be right back. Do hit some cards.
Yeah, why not?
Cheers.